He had ordered men buried beneath concrete. He had watched rivals bleed out on warehouse floors and felt nothing but the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved. Kang Jun-seo had built his empire on fear, silence, and the absolute certainty that he needed no one. Then a 7-year-old girl who had never seen his face drew him standing beside her family, holding their hands beneath a golden sky. And suddenly the most feared man in Seoul couldn't sleep anymore. Some wars are won with weapons. This one would be fought with crayons. Thus, if this story already has you leaning forward, hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now settle in. This one runs deep. The night Kang Jun-seo turned 42, nobody celebrated. Not because people didn't know. His lieutenants knew. His accountants knew. The 3 men who had been with him since the beginning, since the alley behind Mapogu, where a 16-year-old boy with broken knuckles and nothing to lose had first learned what violence could purchase, they knew. But celebrating Jun-seo's birthday required his permission, and he had never once given it. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse on the 53rd floor of a residential tower in Gangnam, a glass of scotch in his hand that he had not touched in 11 minutes, and watched Seoul breathe beneath him. The Han River caught the city lights and fractured them into something almost beautiful. From up here, everything looked orderly, clean, like a circuit board with perfect architecture and no visible damage. He knew better. He had caused most of the damage. The penthouse behind him was the kind of space that appeared in architecture magazines. Polished concrete floors, custom furniture in charcoal and matte black, a kitchen that had never been used for anything warmer than reheating delivered food, 12,000 square feet of precisely curated emptiness, and the only sound was the low mechanical hum of the building's climate system and the faint percussion of his own heartbeat, which he had trained himself over 20 years not to listen to too carefully. His phone sat face down on the kitchen island. Somewhere in the city, his operations manager Shin Dae-won was waiting for a response to a message sent 40 minutes ago about a shipment delay at Incheon. Somewhere else, a financial architect named Park Hyun-gi was restructuring 3 shell companies to absorb a 7-figure discrepancy that didn't officially exist. And in a neighborhood in Itaewon that Jun-seo had never personally visited, a collection of things he had never personally done was continuing to generate profit and fear and power in quantities that would have amazed the boy from Mapogu. He raised the glass, set it back down without drinking. 42 years old. He had survived 4 assassination attempts, 2 government investigations, 1 rival syndicate takeover that should have ended with his head delivered to a contact in Busan, and a decade-long rivalry with a Taiwanese organization that had eventually collapsed, not from violence but from Jun-seo quietly dismantling their financial infrastructure from the inside out, which he had always considered the more elegant solution. He had survived all of it. He had come through every war intact, untouched, unchallenged. He understood with the flat clarity that came to him most often at this hour, completely alone in a way that had nothing to do with the absence of other people. He turned from the window. He picked up the phone. The message from Dae-won read, "Incheon contact says customs delay is not random. Someone is asking questions. Recommend postponing transfer until situation clarifies." Jun-seo typed back 4 words. Find out who's asking. He set the phone down and walked to the bedroom where he would lie on his back in the dark for approximately 2 hours before his body conceded to sleep, the same way it did every night. And in the morning, he would rise at 5:15, and the machinery of his life would resume its rotation, and the city would continue to fear the name that most people in it had never spoken aloud. He did not think about birthdays. He did not think about what was missing. He was very practiced at not thinking about things. 3 weeks later, a junior logistics coordinator named Oh Se-jin brought something to Dae-won's attention that Dae-won, after sitting with it for 48 uncomfortable hours, decided he had no choice but to bring to Jun-seo. It was a photograph. Printed, not digital. Dae-won had printed it himself specifically because he did not want it existing on any network device, which told Jun-seo everything about how seriously the man was taking it before a single word was spoken. They met in the back room of a restaurant in Mapo, that Junseo's organization used for conversations that did not benefit from witnesses. The restaurant's owner had been compensated for this arrangement every month for 11 years and had long ago developed a talent for being entirely elsewhere when certain vehicles arrived after closing time. Daewon placed the photograph on the table. He did not say anything. He watched Junseo's face. The photograph showed a drawing. Child's work, crayon on white paper. The proportions slightly off in the way that children's drawings always were. The figures blocky and simplified. The sky a uniform smear of yellow-orange. 3 figures stood in the center of the image holding hands. On the left, a small, dark-skinned girl with large eyes and an enormous smile. In the middle, a taller, dark-skinned woman with her hair pulled back, smiling the same way. And on the right, a tall Korean man with black hair and dark eyes and a jaw that was, in the imprecise language of crayon, unmistakably square. The Korean man in this drawing was wearing a black coat. Junseo owned 12 black coats. He wore them exclusively. He looked at the drawing for a long time without speaking. Outside, the narrow street was empty. The restaurant smelled like sesame oil and old wood and the particular silence of a space that had absorbed too many difficult conversations. "Where did this come from?" he said. Not a question, a statement requesting information. Social media. A local reporter covered a school art exhibition in Itaewon 3 days ago, posted photos of several students' work. This one got shared. Daewon's voice was professionally neutral. He had been with Junseo for 14 years and had learned the specific discipline of delivering information without visible opinion. Sejin flagged it because of the resemblance. I had him do a full poll before he brought it to me. There are more drawings. How many more? Hundreds. Going back approximately 4 years based on available dates. Junseo looked up from the photograph. 4 years. The child is 7 years old. According to what Sejin found, she began drawing this specific figure around age 3, before she started school. The figure appears in almost every piece she's produced. Junseo turned the photograph over. Then he turned it back. He looked at the tall Korean man with the black coat and the square jaw standing in the yellow crayon sky, holding the hand of a child who had never seen his face. "Who is the family?" he said. "The girl's name is Zuri Brooks, age 7. The mother is Nia Brooks, 29, American national, has been living and working in Seoul for approximately 4 years. She works at a translation and document services company in Itaewon. The father is not in the picture, not legally, not physically. No record of him in the child's documentation." Daewon paused. They live in a rental apartment near the Itaewon market. By all available indicators, they are not wealthy people. Is this a setup? It doesn't look like one. Sejin ran the mother against our known contacts lists, our rivals' known contacts, the government files we have access to. She has no connection to anyone in our world, no criminal record, no surveillance flags. She's a working single mother who is currently 3 months behind on rent and has a medical debt that she has been paying off in installments for over a year. Daewon allowed a measured pause. There is no angle here that we can identify. The drawing is the drawing. Junseo sat back. The photograph stayed on the table between them, face up, the crayon sun burning its warm orange above 3 figures who all looked like they were exactly where they were supposed to be. "A 3-year-old child," Junseo said slowly, "who had never seen me or any photograph of me, began drawing a figure that looks like me 4 years ago and has not stopped." Yes. He didn't say anything else for a while. What he felt, sitting in that back room with the sesame oil smell and the old wood silence, was not what he expected to feel. He had expected the calculation, the automatic mapping of threat vectors, the assessment of exposure, the instinct toward containment that had served him well for 2 decades. Those instincts were present. They were always present, but underneath them, pressing upward with an insistence he found genuinely alarming, was something else, something that felt disturbingly close to being seen. He pushed it down. "Don't delete anything Sejin pulled," he said. "I want a full file. Everything public on the mother and child, quietly." Daewon nodded. He knew better than to ask why. Bong. The file arrived 2 days later on a secure tablet that Junseo reviewed alone in his office, which occupied 1 floor of a Gangnam building whose legitimate face was a mid-sized private equity consultancy with 12 actual employees and a functioning website that had won a minor industry award 3 years prior. He had expected to read through it once, satisfy whatever irrational curiosity had overtaken him, and close the matter. He read it 4 times. Nia Brooks had come to Seoul on a work visa when Zuri was 3 years old. She had left Chicago specifically, the record suggested, to put distance between herself and a situation involving Zuri's father that the documents hinted at but did not detail. She spoke Korean at a conversational level. She had enrolled Zuri in a local school, where the girl was apparently well-liked, described by her teachers in the attached school communications as bright, imaginative, and slightly obsessive about drawing. The medical debt was from an injury Nia had sustained 18 months ago, a fall at work that had resulted in a fractured wrist and 2 damaged tendons in her right shoulder. She had taken reduced hours during recovery. The rent arrears had accumulated during that period. She was paying it back. The record showed every installment, on time, no exceptions, even when the installment must have come at the cost of something else. She had not asked for help from anyone. Jun-seo found that detail sticking in his mind in a way he couldn't explain and didn't particularly want to examine. There were photos in the file, pulled from the school's public social media, from the reporter's article, from the brief online spread of the drawing. Nia was a tall woman with natural hair and precise, careful eyes. She had the look of someone who had learned to perform composure so consistently that it had become genuine, which Jun-seo recognized because he had done the same thing and could therefore identify it in others. In every photograph she appeared with Zuri, and in every photograph Zuri was either drawing or talking with the animated wholeness of a child who had not yet learned that the world required reservation. And the drawings. The reporter had photographed several. A few more existed in the school's posted content. In every one, the Korean man was present, standing beside the girl and her mother, usually holding hands with them, sometimes just standing nearby with his arms at his sides, which Jun-seo found somehow more affecting than the hand-holding versions, because that positioning looked exactly like how he stood when he was trying to figure out what he was supposed to do next, and didn't want anyone to see it. He closed the tablet. He stood at the window of his Gangnam office and looked at the city that feared him and tried very hard to feel nothing. He was partially successful. The following week, Nia Brooks had a bad Tuesday. She didn't know she was being watched. That ignorance was both the only comfortable thing about her situation and the thing that would have frightened her most if she'd known. She left her apartment at 7:45, took Zuri to school, and arrived at the translation office by 9. The office was on the 3rd floor of a mixed-use building in Itaewon, a narrow space with good light and a boss named Mrs. Choi who was demanding in the specific way of small business owners who know their margins leave no room for error. Nia was good at her job, fast, accurate, with an instinct for the particular problem of tone, how to carry the emotional register of a document from one language into another without flattening it into bureaucratic gray. She was in the middle of a contract translation for a hospitality company when her phone rang. It was a number she recognized and didn't want to. The debt collection agency that held the remaining balance of her medical bills had apparently assigned her account to a new representative who had not received the memo about the existing installment arrangement and wanted to renegotiate the terms of repayment in a direction that did not benefit Nia. The call took 22 minutes and ended without resolution. Nia returned to the hospitality contract with a headache sitting directly behind her left eye and the particular tight jaw of someone who has been absorbing things for too long. At lunch, she checked her bank account on her phone. The numbers were what she already knew they were. She put her phone away. At 3:15, a message came from the school. Zuri had gotten into an argument with a classmate over one of her drawings. The classmate had apparently told Zuri that the man in her pictures wasn't real and that she was weird for drawing the same person over and over. Zuri had told the classmate that he was real and that he would come. The classmate had laughed. Zuri had, according to the teacher's careful phrasing, expressed her feelings in a way that resulted in some physical contact. Nia read the message twice. She closed her eyes. Then she typed a measured, professional response to the teacher, gathered her things, and left work 40 minutes early to pick up her daughter, which cost her 40 minutes of paid time she did not have to spare. Zuri was sitting outside the principal's office when Nia arrived, her sketchbook on her lap and a completed drawing on the open page. She looked up when she saw her mother. Her expression did the complicated thing it always did. Guilty and defiant at the same time, in the exact proportion that made her look most like the version of herself that Nia loved most fiercely and found most exhausting. "He said I was making it up," Zuri said before Nia could speak. "I know what he said. He's not made up." "Zuri, he's not." Her voice was firm in the way that small children are firm when they are defending something that exists in a place beyond argument. "I know him. He just hasn't found us yet." Nia sat down beside her daughter in the plastic chair outside the principal's office and looked at the drawing on Zuri's lap. The same tall Korean man, the same black coat. Standing next to the two of them, his face turned slightly as if he was watching for something. "Baby," Nia said carefully, "sometimes we love people we imagine. That's allowed. That's what stories are for. But he's not imagined." Zuri turned the sketchbook to show her mother the drawing more fully. "I can feel him. Like when you're cold and then you step inside and you feel warm, even before you can see the heater. He's like that. He's close." Nia looked at her daughter's drawing for a long time. There were no words for what she felt about these drawings that she had not already exhausted. She had gone through the phases: initial concern, consultation with Zuri's teacher, a single session with a child psychologist who had assessed Zuri as imaginative and emotionally healthy, and gently suggested that the drawings might represent a father figure Zuri was processing the absence of. That explanation made sense. Nia had accepted it because it was the sensible explanation. But the drawings kept coming, consistent over 4 years, and the figure in them was always the same person. And sometimes, in the specific quiet of 2 a.m, when the debt and the pain in her shoulder and the loneliness of being entirely responsible for another human being pressed down hardest, Nia found herself looking at the drawings on Zuri's bedroom wall and feeling something she couldn't name. Not hope exactly. More like the echo of a possibility that hadn't resolved yet. She picked up her daughter's hand. "Come on," she said. "Let's go apologize to the principal and then we're going home." "Am I in trouble?" "Some." "Is it bad trouble or regular trouble?" "Regular. Don't hit people, Zuri." "He called my drawing weird." "I know. Don't hit people anyway." The man 2 blocks away, in the back of a parked black SUV with tinted windows, watched the mother and daughter exit the school building 40 minutes later through a camera lens he wasn't personally operating. One of his people was operating it. Jun-seo sat in the back seat with a glass of water he wasn't drinking, a habit, apparently, that persisted across contexts, and watched the footage feed on a tablet. He watched Nia hold her daughter's hand as they walked. He watched Zuri swing the sketchbook against her leg as she moved, talking with the full-body animation of a 7-year-old who was simultaneously not quite done being upset and very relieved to be with her mother. He watched Nia look down at her daughter with an expression that had layers in it, tired and tender and amused, and scared, all occupying the same real estate simultaneously. And he felt something happen in his chest that he was almost certain had no name in any language he spoke. "Enough," he said. The feed cut. He sat in the darkness of the tinted SUV and thought about what he was doing. He had been surveilling a single mother and her child for 11 days. He had read everything available about their lives. He had looked at hundreds of drawings made by a 7-year-old who had somehow drawn his face before she could have possibly known his face. He was the most feared criminal figure in Seoul. He was conducting surveillance on a woman who was 3 months behind on rent. The cognitive dissonance was not lost on him, but neither was the drawing. He picked up the secure phone. "Pull back," he said. "I don't need more observation." Day One, on the other end, did not ask the obvious question. He had worked for Jun-seo long enough to understand that the absence of an explanation was sometimes the most significant information available. "Pull back to passive monitoring only," Day One confirmed. "Anything specific to watch for?" Jun-seo thought about Nia's expression as she walked out of the school, the layers of it, the weight that she was carrying with such visible practiced efficiency. "If anyone approaches them with hostile intent," he said, "I want to know immediately." Another pause. "Understood." He ended the call. He looked out the window at Seoul moving around him. The delivery motorcycles and the late afternoon foot traffic and the ordinary, uncomplicated texture of a city that had no idea what moved through it. He had built his empire on the premise that power was the only thing that lasted. That fear was the only reliable currency. That connection was a liability that enemies exploited. He had believed that for 26 years. He did not entirely believe it today. The thing about debt was that it had a way of arriving from multiple directions simultaneously, as if the various creditors had coordinated their timing for maximum psychological effect. Nia was aware that this was not actually true. She was aware that the timing was coincidental, and that the sensation of siege was a feature of anxiety rather than reality. She was a precise and intelligent person who could identify irrational thinking patterns with clinical accuracy. Knowing this did not stop the sensation of siege. The landlord's message arrived on a Thursday, 2 weeks after the school incident. The message was polite in the superficial way of messages that contain genuinely bad news. Lots of honorifics, lots of apology language, the careful Korean politeness that cushioned the content without changing it. The building's ownership had passed to a new management company as of the first of the month. The new management company was reviewing all existing lease agreements. Several units had been identified for renovation and retenancy at market rates. Nia's unit was among them. She had 30 days to either agree to a new lease at a monthly rate that was 40% higher than her current payment or vacate the premises. Nia read the message standing in her kitchen after putting Zuri to bed. The apartment was quiet. Through the thin walls, she could hear the television from the unit next door, the muffled domestic soundtrack of someone else's evening. She set her phone down on the counter. She looked at the wall. On the counter beside her phone was an unopened envelope from the collection agency. She hadn't opened it yet because she already knew what it said, and knowing it and reading it were two different categories of bad that she was managing sequentially. She ran the numbers in her head. She had done this calculation so many times that it had become involuntary, like a tick. Income minus fixed expenses minus current debt payments. The margin was narrow under existing conditions. Under the proposed new rent, it did not exist. She could look for a different apartment. She had done the preliminary search 3 months ago when the rent arrears first became significant and had found that the Itaewon area, where Zuri's school was, where Nia's office was, where the 4 years of built routine lived, had moved well beyond what her income could reach. Moving further out was possible, but introduced transportation costs and time costs, and the specific cost of disrupting Zuri's school situation, which the psychologist had emphasized was important to maintain. She could ask her mother in Chicago for help. Her mother would give it without hesitation and without resentment, and with exactly the unspoken subtext of, "I told you not to go," that Nia would feel for months afterward. This was not a reason not to ask. She was aware of that. She just hadn't done it yet. She picked up the counter and tore open the collection agency envelope. It was worse than she'd estimated. They had added a processing fee. There was a new representative's name at the bottom of the letter in a font that was somehow simultaneously official and indifferent. Nia folded the letter, placed it on top of the landlord's message on her phone screen, turned off the kitchen light. She went to check on Zuri. Her daughter was asleep on her side, one hand tucked under her cheek, the sketchbook on the nightstand beside her like a comfort object. Nia stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at her child, the specific, perfect weight of her, the eyelashes against her cheek, the way her breathing in sleep sounded like something that had never needed to worry about anything. On Zuri's wall, held by tape that Nia periodically replaced when it gave, were rows of drawings, dozens of them. The same 3 figures, over and over, in different configurations and different colors and different weather, sometimes indoors, sometimes out. Sometimes the Korean man was kneeling down to Zuri's height. Sometimes he was standing behind both of them with his arms open. In one drawing that Nia always came back to, he was sitting at a table eating with them, and his head was tilted at an angle that looked exactly like someone who was listening to what the person across from him was saying with his whole body, and not just his ears. Nia had grown up without her own father. She knew exactly what that absence felt like. Not like a wound exactly, more like a specific shape of empty that you learn to account for, to work around, to fill with other things. She had been okay. She was okay. She had made Zuri okay. But she looked at that drawing of the man listening at the table, and she felt the shape of the empty. She pulled Zuri's door to its halfway point. She walked to her own room. She sat on the edge of her bed and added up numbers in her head again, until the adding stopped being useful, and she lay down in her clothes and stared at the ceiling and waited for her body to decide that sleep was a viable option. It took a long time. The attack, when it came, was not subtle. It was a Friday evening. Nia had picked up Zuri from school, they had stopped at the market for groceries, and they were 3 minutes from their building when the men appeared. There were 3 of them. They had been waiting, which meant this was not opportunistic. The narrow street that connected the main road to the residential lane where their building sat had exactly one functional light fixture, and it happened to be the one that had been out for 2 weeks, which Nia had reported to the building manager and which remained unrepaired. The timing of its remaining unrepaired suddenly seemed less coincidental. Zuri had Nia's hand in her sketchbook. Nia had 2 bags of groceries and the specific hyper-awareness that comes from being a woman alone with a child at dusk in an unlit space. The threat assessment that runs as background process, regardless of whether the threat is present. The threat was present. The man who spoke first was not Korean. He spoke Korean, but his accent placed him elsewhere, and his build and the way he carried his weight said something about experience with spaces like this. He used the specific language of loan collection that was one step removed from direct threat. The language that says, "We know, you know what this is," while maintaining the thin veneer of a conversation. He knew Nia's name. He knew the amount she owed. He knew she had missed the new collection agency's revised payment deadline. "The new company doesn't have the same patience," he said. "They want a resolution." Zuri pressed against Nia's side. She was very still. She was 7 years old and she understood the register of this conversation, even if she didn't have words for it. Nia kept her voice level. "I have a payment arrangement." "You had a payment arrangement? Management changed. I'll contact the new company Monday." "Tonight would be better." The second man moved to close off the street behind them, not dramatically, not rushing, just repositioning. The third man was further back, near the building entrance, covering the other exit. Nia's grocery bags were heavy. She thought about Zuri's hand in hers, the specific weight and warmth of it. She thought about the distance to the main road, to the lit street, to the presence of other people. She calculated it the same way she calculated everything, fast and without space for feeling until the calculation was done. The calculation was not good. "I need to take my daughter inside," Nia said, "after we reach an agreement. She's 7 years old." The amount is the amount, the timeline. And then, from the far end of the narrow street, lights. Not one vehicle. 3. Black SUVs with the kind of unhurried authority that comes from knowing, with complete certainty, that they are the largest thing in any space they enter. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. They pulled into the narrow street with the slow deliberateness of something that had decided to arrive and was simply completing the formality of arriving. The 3 men went still. The doors of the vehicles opened. Men got out. 5, then 7, then 9. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to say anything. They existed with a specific quality of presence that communicated everything necessary without language. The man who had been speaking to Nia looked at the vehicles, looked at the men, did a very rapid recalculation. He left. The other 2 left with him. No argument, no escalation, no face-saving that would have extended the encounter. They just folded into the dark and were gone, which told Nia they knew exactly what kind of night they did not want to be having. She stood in the narrow street with her groceries and her daughter, and her heart moving at a speed that she was only now permitting herself to feel. Zuri was looking at the vehicles. Then Zuri was looking at one of the vehicles specifically. Then Zuri was looking at the man who had gotten out of the center vehicle and was walking toward them with the measured stride of someone who covered distance without appearing to move quickly. He was tall. He was wearing a black coat. His jaw was exactly the shape it was in hundreds of drawings, made over 4 years by a 7-year-old girl who had never seen his face. Nia felt the air leave her body. Zuri let go of her hand. Not running, walking, the deliberate walk of a child, approaching something she has been waiting for with the absolute patience of a certainty that required no urgency. She stopped in front of the man. She looked up at him. He stopped. He looked down at her. And in his face, in the controlled mask of the most feared man in Seoul, something happened that Nia would never be able to describe accurately. A crack, not dramatic, barely perceptible, the way the surface of ice changes in the moment before it gives. Zuri reached into her sketchbook. She pulled out a drawing. She held it up for him to see. 3 figures, a golden sky. 2 of them she knew. One of them was him. He took the drawing. He looked at it for a long time. When Zuri spoke, her voice had the ringing clarity of a child who has been waiting to ask a question and has finally arrived at the moment that was always coming. Why did you take so long to find us? The narrow street was completely quiet. Kang Jun-seo, who had not been surprised by anything in 11 years, stood in a lightless lane in Itaewon holding a crayon drawing made by a 7-year-old girl and found that he did not have an answer. He looked up from the drawing. He looked at Nia. She was staring at him with the controlled face of a woman who was performing composure at maximum capacity and whose eyes were doing something entirely different. In those eyes was the expression of someone confronting a thing they had told themselves was not real and finding out that the telling hadn't worked. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. Daewon's voice came from near one of the vehicles. Quiet, professional. "Boss, we should move." Jun-seo did not move. He was still looking at Nia. She was still looking at him. Between them, Zuri stood with her sketchbook and the patient, untroubled certainty of a child who had always known how this particular story went and was simply waiting for the adults to catch up. "You're not safe here," Jun-seo said. His voice came out different than he intended, rougher, less controlled. Nia's jaw tightened. "I know that. I can—" He stopped, recalibrated. What was he about to offer? What was he doing? "Are you hurt?" "No." "Zuri?" Nia's eyes changed at the sound of her daughter's name in his mouth. "She's fine." And then very carefully, "How do you know her name?" The question sat in the air between them. Jun-seo held the crayon drawing in his hand. He looked at the 3 figures in the golden sky. He looked at this woman with her grocery bags and her controlled face and a remarkable daughter, and he understood with the absolute clarity of a man who had survived everything by being honest with himself at the moments that mattered most that he was standing at the exact edge of something he could not walk back from. He had 2 choices. He could get back in the SUV. He could send Daewon to make sure the loan sharks understood their error. He could continue to observe from a distance, to remain the ghost he had always been, to close the file on the family in Itaewon and return to the penthouse on the 53rd floor where the climate system hummed and the scotch sat untouched and nothing required anything of him that he wasn't fully prepared to give. Or, "I need to explain some things," he said. "Not here." Nia looked at him. At the vehicles. At the men standing at a careful, professional distance. At her daughter, who was looking up at Jun-seo with an expression of pure, uncomplicated recognition. "You can start," Nia said slowly, "by telling me how you know my daughter's name." Behind her, the unlit street stretched back toward the main road. Ahead of them, Jun-seo stood with a child's drawing in his hand and 14 years of distance between himself and the last time he'd tried to want something. He did not get back in the SUV. 3 kilometers away, in an office tower in Yoido that bore no exterior signage identifying its actual occupants, a man named Oh Tae-guk was looking at surveillance photographs. The photographs were high quality. They showed Kang Jun-seo standing in a narrow street in Itaewon. They showed a woman and a child. They showed the precise, unprecedented image of Jun-seo holding a piece of paper, a drawing, it appeared, and looking at it with an expression that Oh Tae-guk's trained eyes identified immediately as vulnerability. Oh Tae-guk had been trying to find Jun-seo's weakness for 6 years. He had looked for financial pressure points, for professional betrayals, for the hidden vice or the hidden loyalty that every powerful man eventually possessed, and that a patient enough observer could locate and exploit. He had found nothing. For 6 years, nothing. He looked at the photograph of Jun-seo and the child and the mother. He looked at the expression on Jun-seo's face that Jun-seo would never have permitted if he'd known a camera was present. Oh Tae-guk set down the photograph. He picked up his phone. "Get me everything on the woman and child in Itaewon," he said. "I want it by morning." He set the phone down and looked at the photograph for one more moment. 6 years of nothing. And now, at last, something. The car smelled like leather and something chemical, the specific neutrality of a space that had been cleaned too many times to have a natural smell anymore. Nia sat in the back seat of the center SUV with Zuri against her side, and a man she didn't know across from her, and she kept her hands flat on her thighs because flat hands didn't shake as visibly as hands that were trying to hold on to something. Zuri was asleep. That was the thing about 7-year-olds. The extreme emotional events and the ordinary ones occupied the same metabolic register. And after the narrow street and the men and the vehicles and the moment that Nia still couldn't process without her chest doing something involuntary, Zuri had simply leaned against her mother's arm in the moving car and closed her eyes and been gone within 4 minutes. Her sketchbook was in her lap. Her breathing was the slow, uncomplicated breathing of a child who had gotten exactly what she expected and was now resting. Jonseo had not looked at them since the car started moving. He sat across from her. The vehicle was large enough that there was real distance between the seats. With his elbow on the door and his eyes on something outside the window that Nia doubted he was actually seeing, he still had the drawing. He was holding it with a care that she found more disorienting than almost anything else about the evening, because it was not the care of someone who had been handed something and didn't know where to put it. It was the care of someone who was holding something they didn't want to damage. The driver and the man in the passenger seat were not participating in the silence. They were just present, which was its own kind of participation. "Where are we going?" Nia said. "Somewhere that isn't that street." His voice was flat. Not unfriendly, just the voice of someone who used words as tools rather than currency. "That's not an answer." He turned from the window, looked at her directly. His eyes were dark and precise in the way of eyes that had learned to take in information quickly and reveal nothing in return. "A safe house, 20 minutes. You don't have to stay. I'll have someone drive you home after we talk." "We're talking now." "Not in the car." "Why not?" The pause was short. "Because what I have to tell you should be said in a room where you can walk away from me if you need to." Nia looked at him. She had assessed men her entire adult life, the specific competency of a woman who had grown up without a consistent male presence and had learned early to read the difference between performance and reality, between what a man showed and what he actually was. She had been wrong before. She had been profoundly wrong once, specifically, in a way that had resulted in a 3-year-old girl and a one-way flight to Seoul, and a debt that took different forms but was always present. She looked at Kang Jun-seo, and she read him the way she read everything, fast, layered, without the luxury of wishful thinking. He was dangerous. That was not in question, and she wasn't going to pretend it was. The vehicles, the men, the way the 3 loan sharks had simply ceased to exist as a problem the moment he appeared, none of that pointed toward a civilian. She had landed in something she didn't have a map for. But he was also, in the way that mattered right now, telling her the truth. She could hear it in the register of his voice. Whatever he had to say, he intended to say it. That wasn't comfort exactly, but it was something to stand on. 20 minutes, she said. He turned back to the window. The safe house was not what she expected. She had built an image in the car, something deliberately austere, industrial, the cinematic shorthand for where dangerous men conducted dangerous business. What she got was a mid-sized apartment on the 12th floor of an ordinary residential building in Mapo, clean and minimally furnished, with a kitchen that actually had food in it, and a secondary room visible through a half-open door that contained a low bed and a shelf of children's books. She stopped at the threshold of that room. "The books are new," Junso said from behind her. She heard the slight tightness in his voice, the sound of a man aware of how something looks. "I was informed a child might be present." Nia turned slowly. "You were informed." "I made arrangements." "Before tonight." He met her eyes without flinching. "Yes." The air in the apartment was very still. Zuri stirred against Nia's shoulder. She had carried her up from the car without waking her, and resettled without opening her eyes. Nia shifted her daughter's weight and looked at the man who had arranged a room with children's books for a child he had never officially met, based on the foreknowledge that they might need it. "Sit down," she said. Her voice had gone quiet in the way that voices went quiet when they were managing something very large. "And start from the beginning." He told her almost everything. Not everything. There were parts of his operation that served no purpose to share and would only introduce a level of detail that would replace one kind of fear with another. But he told her about Seijin and the photograph, about the file, about the 11 days of observation, about the drawings, not just the one she'd seen him holding, but all of them, the hundreds, the 4 years of a child drawing a face she couldn't have known. He told it without embellishment, in the same flat, functional way that he delivered operational information, because that was the only honest register he had. He sat across the low table from her with his hands laced together and his elbows on his knees, and he did not soften any of it. When he finished, the apartment was quiet. Nia was sitting with her back very straight. Zuri was on the couch beside her, still asleep, turned on her side with her sketchbook tucked against her stomach. "You've been watching us for 11 days, Nia said. "Yes." "Without my knowledge." "Yes." "You have a file on me." "Had. It's not active." "That distinction matters a lot less than you might think." Her voice was controlled in the way of someone who has located the calm in the center of something turbulent and is standing on it very carefully. "My financial records, my medical history, my work schedule." "Yes." "Because a drawing looked like you." Something moved in his face. Not guilt exactly. Closer to the look of a man who, in this moment, is not trying to defend what he did, but is also not entirely sorry he did it. That's where it started. Where did it end? He looked at her steadily. "I don't know yet." Nia drew in a slow breath through her nose, released it. "Mr. Kang, Junseo." Mr. Kang. She was not giving him that, not tonight. "You conducted surveillance on a civilian woman and her child without legal authority or my consent. You have information about my life that I didn't give you, and now you're—" She looked around the apartment, at the children's books, and the clean kitchen, and the stocked shelves. "You've prepared a space for us, which means you anticipated this conversation, which means you planned for a version of tonight in which we ended up here." She paused. "Did you arrange for those men to be there?" The silence that followed was 3 seconds long. "No," he said. And then, because the question deserved more, "The loan company that holds your debt was acquired recently by a management group. That group has connections to collection methods that fall outside legal boundaries. I became aware of it when I was reviewing your financial situation. When you were surveilling me." "Yes." "And you didn't warn me." "I was going to." He heard how that sounded. He didn't look away from it. "I moved the timeline up tonight because my monitoring indicated a risk window. I was late." Nia looked at him for a long time. "You were late," she repeated softly. He didn't say anything. "They had a 7-year-old girl in that street," Nia said, and now the control in her voice had a texture in it, something that had friction and edges. "She was holding my hand. She saw those men. She felt what that was." "I know. Do you?" "Yes." Quiet, flat, but underneath it something that had weight. "I know exactly what that was. I should have moved sooner. I didn't. That's on me." It was the specificity of the accountability that got to her. Not an apology dressed up in excuses, just the direct assignment of fault. No distribution, no negotiation. She had not expected that from him, and it moved something in her assessment that she immediately tried to move back. "I want to be angry at you," she said. "You are angry at me. I want it to be simple." It isn't. She looked at her daughter. The slow breathing, the sketchbook, the shelf of books visible through the open door. Zuri, who had known. Somehow, in the non-rational way that made no sense and couldn't be argued out of, and had been present for 4 years, Zuri had known. "What do you want from us?" Nia said. The question was direct and deliberate. She needed it answered without ornamentation. Junseo unclasped his hands. He looked at them for a moment, which was the first uncertain physical gesture she had seen from him, the first crack in the controlled surface. "I don't know how to answer that in a way that won't sound like a threat or a transaction. My life doesn't give me a lot of practice with wanting things that aren't tactical." "Try." He looked up. "I want to make sure you're safe. Both of you." "We don't need—" "The collection group that came tonight will come back. Different men, same instruction. The lease situation you're facing has a connection to the same management group. I traced it 2 days ago. Someone is applying pressure to your financial situation from multiple directions simultaneously, and it didn't start as coincidence." Nia went still. "What does that mean?" "It means that as of approximately 3 weeks ago, someone identified your connection to me, through the drawing, through the press coverage, and began engineering a financial crisis to make you easier to leverage." The apartment was very quiet. "Leverage against you," Nia said slowly. "Yes." She pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose. closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. When she opened them, something had settled in her expression. Not calm, exactly, but the operational mode of a person who has received bad information and is now deciding what to do with it. So tonight wasn't random. No. And the rent increase. Also not random. How long have you known this? 48 hours. Her jaw went tight. And you waited 48 hours. I was verifying before I brought you information that would terrify you without being certain it was accurate. A pause. I was wrong to wait. You keep saying that. You keep doing the wrong thing and then saying you were wrong. Her voice had an edge now. Real edge. What does that actually mean? Because from where I'm sitting, you surveilled us without consent. You sat on information for 2 days that directly affected our safety, and you... She stopped. Reset. I don't know you. Zuri thinks she knows you. Those are very different things. He absorbed this without defending himself. She watched him absorb it and noted again the absence of the usual male reflexes. The protestation, the pivoting, the sudden production of reasons why the criticism missed the point. He just took it and sat with it and let it be accurate. It made him harder to dismiss, which made her angrier. I'm not asking you to trust me, he said. I'm telling you that the situation around you has become dangerous in a way that exists regardless of whether I'm involved. The people applying pressure to your finances are connected to a rival organization. They identified you as a pressure point because of the drawings. None of that changes if you walk out of this apartment and decide you never want to see me again. But you'd still be watching. I'd still make sure you were safe, without my knowledge or consent. If necessary, yes. The honesty of it was almost insulting. He wasn't going to dress it up. He wasn't going to pretend he'd step back and let them be endangered because she preferred not to be protected by him. Nia stood up. She walked to the window. Seoul was laid out below. The same city from a different angle, the same light scattered across the same river. She had come here 4 years ago to build something clean, a life that was hers, that Zuri's was hers, that didn't have anyone else's shape pressed into it. She had built it piece by piece at real cost, and she had been proud of it even when the bills came and the shoulder hurt and the loneliness at 2 a.m. was a physical pressure. She turned around. I'll stay tonight, she said, because moving Zuri at midnight is stupid, and I'm not doing it for pride. But tomorrow I need answers, real answers, not what you think I need to hear, what is actually happening and what are my actual options. She held his gaze. And if I decide that the best option for my daughter is to put distance between her and whatever your life has made necessary, you will respect that. Junseo stood. They were the same height, nearly, which she hadn't noticed in the street. He looked at her and said nothing for a long moment. Yes, he said. She went back to the couch. She sat beside Zuri and pulled her daughter against her side. Zuri stirred. Mom, Zuri murmured, half in sleep. I'm here. Is he still here? A beat. Yes. Zuri settled back into sleep with the satisfied exhale of someone whose most important question has been answered. Nia looked at the wall and not at Junseo and tried to figure out what came next. He didn't sleep. He sat in the kitchen of the safe house with the door to the main room half open, within hearing distance, and worked. The tablet in front of him connected to the secure network. He pulled everything current on Otaeguk, not a name he'd been treating as an imminent threat, but the surveillance photograph that Daewon had flagged 3 hours ago had changed the calculation. Taeguk had been watching the street in Itaewon. That meant Taeguk had been watching Junseo watching the family, which meant the intelligence gap was larger than Junseo had assessed, which meant he had made a mistake. The specific kind of mistake that came from letting something personal soften the operational discipline that had kept him alive for 20 years. He had let himself be seen. He pulled up the organizational map of Taeguk's operation. A mid-tier syndicate, Yeouido-based, import and finance-focused, with a history of finding leverage and applying it with patience rather than force. They didn't win confrontations, they engineered collapses. 6 years of quiet movement at the periphery of Junseo's operation, never directly challenging, always watching. 6 years of watching, and now they had found something worth using. From the other room came the sound of Zuri's breathing and the faint shift of the couch as Nia adjusted position. Normal sounds, domestic sounds, the kind of sounds his penthouse had never contained. He looked at the organizational map. Taeguk had moved on the family's finances 2 weeks before the street confrontation. That was preparation, not reaction. It meant the street confrontation had been intended as an introduction, a demonstration that pressure was possible, delivered at a moment chosen to be witnessed. Not by Naya, by Jun-seo. I know what you care about. I know where it lives. He had been sent a message in the language of a man's specific fear. Jun-seo closed the organizational map. He opened the communication thread with Day 1. Taeguk, he typed. I want the full network map by morning. Every financial connection, every personnel relationship, all of it. The response came in 40 seconds. Day 1 was also not sleeping, already running, also the Incheon delay. The person asking questions at customs traces back to a Yoido shell company registered 14 months ago. Jun-seo looked at that for a moment. 14 months. Taeguk had started building this approach 14 months ago, before Sejin flagged the drawing, before the reporter's article, before any public connection between Jun-seo and the family in Itaewon could have been identified, which meant either the intelligence on Taeguk's timeline was wrong or Taeguk had known about the family before Jun-seo had. He sat with the implication of that. How did Taeguk identify the family before the article? He typed. A longer pause this time. Then, unknown. Working it. Jun-seo set the tablet face down on the table. He pressed his palms flat against the surface. He looked at the grain of the wood and breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth and let the information sit in his body the way difficult information needed to sit before it could be used. Someone in his organization had told Taeguk about the family, before Jun-seo had known about the family himself, which meant the surveillance of the family hadn't been Jun-seo's discovery. It had been Taeguk's setup. The drawing, the reporter, the spread across social media, the way it had reached Sejin, junior logistics, not intelligence, not the kind of staff who typically processed external media flags. Had that been engineered? Had Sejin been the point of contact, the unwitting delivery system for information that was supposed to reach Jun-seo and produce exactly this response? He had walked into this. For the first time in 11 years, Kang Jun-seo had been led somewhere. He picked up the tablet. Pull Sejin's communication records for the past 60 days. Everything. Don't tell him. He put the tablet down again. In the other room, Zuri made a small sound in her sleep. Not distress, just the random vocal punctuation of deep sleep. And then was quiet again. Nia's breath didn't change. She was still awake, lying still, performing sleep without achieving it. He could tell from the quality of the silence. He thought about the drawing she had been carrying in her sketchbook tonight. Not the one she'd handed him, a different one, visible when the book had fallen open in the car. The Korean man sitting at a table, head tilted, listening. A child had drawn him the way he might have been. He understood now that it was possible someone had used that, used his own unresolved longing as a trapdoor. That the thing that had finally penetrated his defenses after 20 years of building them was not a weapon or an investigation, but a 7-year-old girl's drawing of a man sitting at a table, listening. If that was the weapon Taeguk had deployed, Jun-seo had to admit it was the most effective thing that had ever been used against him. He also understood, sitting in the kitchen of the safe house with his empire suddenly mapped differently than it had been 12 hours ago, that it didn't change anything about what he felt when he looked at that drawing, which was its own kind of problem. His phone buzzed. Day 1. Sejin's records show communication with an unknown number starting 9 weeks ago. Encrypted, still cracking. But, boss. The unknown number traces to a registered consultant firm in Yoido. Jun-seo stared at the screen. Taeguk's umbrella, he typed back. Yes. He set the phone face down. 9 weeks ago. Sejin had been compromised 9 weeks ago. The whole chain, the flag, the file, the 11 days of observation, the growing attachment that Jun-seo had not examined critically enough because it was attached to a thing he wanted to believe, had been constructed by someone else's hands and delivered to him like a gift. He had been given exactly what he would have chosen if he could choose, and he had taken it. From the main room, the sound of Nia moving, not settling, rising. He heard bare feet on the floor, and then she appeared in the kitchen doorway in the gray pre-dawn light, her hair loose, her arms crossed over her chest. She had not been sleeping. Her eyes were clear and careful and reading him the same way she always read him. She looked at his face. "Something happened," she said. Not a question. He looked at her across the kitchen. Outside, Seoul was beginning its first gray shift toward morning. He had information he needed to give her, and giving it was going to change everything she had been willing to tentatively hold on to about tonight. "Sit down," he said. Her jaw tightened. "Stop saying that." "Nia." The name came out direct. Her eyes changed at it. A small, involuntary reaction, the first time he'd used her name. "Sit down, please." She sat. He put the tablet on the table so she could see the communication records. He watched her read. He watched her face process the information the way her face processed everything, layer by layer, the composure staying in place but the eyes going somewhere that had no composure in it at all. When she looked up, there was something new in her expression. "Someone set this up," she said. "Yes." "The drawing, the article, the way it reached you." "I believe so. Which means—" She stopped, swallowed. "Which means whoever did this knew that the drawing would work on you. They knew you'd respond to it. They knew enough about you to predict that a child's drawing would—" Another stop. She was pressing her thumbnail into her palm under the table. He could see the movement of her wrist. "They used Zuri." The word sat between them like something that had been dropped from a height. "I don't know if the drawings themselves were manufactured," he said carefully. "I don't believe Zuri Asko—" She didn't know. Her voice had gone somewhere very flat. She wouldn't, she's 7. But if someone saw her drawings before the article, if someone knew about them and decided to use them as a delivery mechanism. She stopped again. "My daughter's art. Someone used my daughter's art to run an operation." Jun Seo said nothing. There was nothing to say that would make the truth of it smaller. Nia put her face in her hands, not crying. He understood the distinction. Just a woman placing her palms against her own face for 5 seconds and breathing in the dark of her own hands, buying herself the specific privacy of no one being able to see her expression while she absorbed something. When she lowered her hands, her eyes were dry and her jaw was set, and something in her posture had changed, had taken on the particular quality of a person who has made a decision that they know they will pay for, but have made it anyway. "Tell me what you need to do," she said. "Nia, don't." Her eyes were direct and without room in them. "Don't do the thing where you manage me. Tell me what you need to do, because if someone is willing to use Zuri to get to you, then my options are not what I thought they were when I went to sleep, and I need to understand what they actually are." He looked at her. This woman who had come to Seoul to build something clean and had been surveilled and leveraged and was now sitting across from him in a safe house kitchen at 4 a.m. with the full weight of an unknown enemy's planning pressing down on her family, and was asking, not for comfort, not for protection, but for information. To be treated as a party to her own situation. "The man who arranged this is named Oh Tae-guk," Junseo said. "He has been building toward this for over a year. He has a contact inside my organization who has been feeding him information. The financial pressure on your housing and your debt is engineered, and it will continue and escalate until what? Until he can use you and Zuri to pull me into a position he's chosen." She was very still. "What position?" "I don't know yet, but a man who builds for 14 months doesn't do it for a single confrontation. He's building towards something final." He paused. "And he knows you're here now. He had someone watching the street tonight." Nia looked at the table, at the tablet with its communication records. The tablet was still on the table between them. Nia hadn't moved. She was looking at the communication records the way people looked at things they needed to understand completely before they could afford to feel anything about them. The focused, clinical attention of someone buying themselves time. Her thumbnail had stopped pressing into her palm. Both hands were flat on the table now, which Junseo had learned in the past 6 hours meant she was holding herself to a decision. "Zuri doesn't know any of this," she said. "No. She can't know." Agreed. "If she finds out that someone used her drawings to—" Nia stopped. Reset. She believes in him, in you, in whatever version of you she's been drawing for 4 years. If that gets contaminated by this, her jaw moved. She's 7. She doesn't get to have her instincts turned into a weapon and then be told about it. She won't hear it from me. Nia looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. One clean movement, the kind that closed a door firmly. "What do you need from me?" she said. "Stay here through the morning. Let me get better information on Taeguk's next move before you go back to the apartment." "I have work." "I know. I can't just disappear. I have a job. Zuri has school. I have obligations that don't pause because—" "I know." He said it without frustration, which she seemed to notice. "I'm not asking you to disappear. I'm asking for the morning." She looked at the window. The gray had deepened slightly. Not sunrise, but the particular pre-dawn quality of light that was the city beginning to remember itself. She looked tired in the way that went deeper than one missed night. "The morning," she said. "Yes." She stood, picked up the tablet, handed it back to him, and walked back to the main room without another word. He heard the couch settle. He heard Zuri make the small sound she made when her mother's warmth returned beside her. Then silence. Junseo turned back to his phone and his tablet and the architecture of a problem that was showing him new dimensions every hour. He didn't sleep at all. Daewon arrived at 7:15 with 2 other men in a folder that he placed on the kitchen table without preamble. He glanced once toward the closed main room door, registered the situation without commenting on it, and sat across from Junseo with the expression of someone who has been awake all night organizing bad news. "Sejin," Junseo said. "Confirmed. The communication records show 61 encrypted exchanges over 9 weeks. We cracked 11 of them so far." Daewon opened the folder. Printed sheets. He pushed the top one across the table. The earliest ones are mostly observation data. Schedules, movement patterns. His access level gave Taeguk our internal calendar for 3 logistics operations. What did Taeguk give him in return? Money. Not large amounts. Small enough to be explainable as personal income if anyone checked. And Daewon paused. The pause was significant. A promise of placement. Taeguk offered Sejin a position in his organization, senior level, the kind of level it would take Sejin another decade to reach with us. Junseo looked at the printed sheet. Sejin's name at the top. The numbers below it. A junior logistics coordinator who had been with the organization for 2 years, who had been specifically positioned at the intake point where external media flags were processed, who had brought the drawing to Daewon with exactly the right amount of casual concern to make it appear like initiative rather than delivery. He knew what the drawing would do, Junseo said. He was briefed. The exchanges from week 3 show Taeguk explaining the psychological mechanism, that the face resemblance would create curiosity, that the child's age and the duration of the drawings would create something harder to dismiss than a one-time encounter. Daewon's voice stayed professionally flat. Taeguk had been monitoring the family for 14 months before Sejin delivered the flag. He identified the drawings much earlier, through a different channel we haven't traced yet. The reporter's article was real, but Taeguk had people ready to amplify it the moment it posted. Junseo was quiet for a long time. "Where is Sejin now?" "Building. He came in at 6:30, normal schedule." A pause. "He doesn't know we've cracked the records." "Keep it that way." Junseo turned the printed sheet face down. "I want him accessible. Don't move on him yet." Daewon nodded. He understood the strategy without being told. A compromised contact who didn't know he was burned was still a usable channel. Feed him selected information. See what Taeguk did with it. Map the response time and the response content and build a clearer picture of what Taeguk was actually planning. "There's more," Daewon said. Junseo looked at him. Daewon pushed a second sheet across the table. This one had a name at the top that Junseo recognized in the specific physical way of recognition that arrives in the chest before it reaches the mind. Park Hyun-gi, his financial architect. 12 years. The man who had restructured the shell companies. The man who held the complete map of every financial instrument in Junseo's operation, every legitimate and illegitimate structure, every account and asset and liability. "No," Junseo said. "The timeline overlaps." "No." "Boss, oh..." Show me the evidence. His voice had gone very quiet. The specific quiet that his people knew meant the space between listening and action had narrowed to almost nothing. Daewon pushed 3 more sheets across the table. Jun-seo read them. He read them twice. Park Hyun-gi had been in communication with Taeguk's network for not 9 weeks, not 14 months. 3 years. 3 years ago, Park Hyun-gi had begun a slow, systematic leak of financial intelligence to a shell network that fed ultimately to Oh Taeguk's operation. Not the primary accounts. Nothing that would have triggered Jun-seo's monitoring protocols. The secondary instruments, the offshore structures, the emergency liquidity positions, the information that wouldn't be used for a quick strike but would be invaluable for mapping a total collapse. 3 years of it. Jun-seo set the papers down. He stood up. He walked to the kitchen window. He looked at the street below. Ordinary morning Seoul, delivery trucks and commuters, and a vendor setting up a cart with the efficient routine of someone who did this every day without thinking about it. He watched a woman in a yellow coat walk past with a child on her back. He watched a light change from red to green and watched the traffic respond to it. He breathed. In the other room, he heard Zuri wake up. He heard her voice, the groggy, wondering quality of a child coming out of deep sleep, and then Nia's voice answering her, low and steady. He turned back to the table. "How deep did Hyun-gi go?" he said. Daewon's expression did not change, but something around his eyes tightened in a way that prepared Jun-seo for the answer. "We're still mapping it, but based on what we have, the offshore structures in Singapore and the Cayman accounts are exposed. Taeguk has the architecture. He knows where the money lives." "How much?" "If he moves on all of it simultaneously," Daewon stopped, chose the words, "enough to destabilize the legitimate operations, the consultancy, the development holdings, the shipping partnerships. If Taeguk publishes the financial map to the right authorities along with the right framing, the investigation alone would freeze 60% of your operable assets." The kitchen was very quiet. "He doesn't need to win a war," Jun-seo said. "No, he just needs to collapse the floor." He saw it clearly now. The patience of it, the architecture of it, the 14 months and the 3 years, and the careful layering. Taeguk wasn't planning an attack. He was planning a demolition. Find the supports, remove them quietly. Then, when the moment was right, pull the one visible beam that brought the whole structure down. The family was bait for the moment, not the method. He wanted me visible, attached, exposed. When he moves on the money and the legal exposure simultaneously while I'm distracted managing a personal situation. That's our assessment. And Hyun-gi. We don't know if he's still active or if the channel has been dormant. The last confirmed exchange was 4 weeks ago. 4 weeks ago. Before the drawing. Before Sijin. Before any of this had surfaced. Hyun-gi had gone quiet before the operation moved into its visible phase, which meant either he had finished what Taeguk needed from him, or he had been instructed to go dark and wait. 12 years. Jun-seo thought about the man. The way he talked, the careful competency of him, the dry professional humor in meetings, the decade plus of visible loyalty that had earned him the kind of access that made 3 years of quiet leaking possible. He thought about every room Hyun-gi had been in, every conversation, every financial decision made in his presence. He did not feel the anger yet. That would come. The anger was there, fully formed, waiting behind a wall that he was currently choosing to keep in place because anger now would cost him clarity, and he needed clarity more than he needed to feel what he felt. Where is Hyun-gi? Office, normal schedule. Same instruction as Sijin. Don't move, don't signal. Daewon nodded. From the main room came the sound of the bathroom door, then water running, then Zuri's voice again asking about breakfast with the cheerful, direct practicality of a child who had woken up in an unfamiliar place and had one priority. Jun-seo looked at the folder on the table. At the printed sheets with their columns of evidence, the clinical documentation of a betrayal that had been building for 3 years in the same rooms where he had made decisions that he believed were private. He closed the folder. Feed Sijin something, he said. Low-grade operational data. Nothing that creates real exposure. I want to measure Taeguk's response time. And Hyun-gi? Leave him alone for now. If he's dormant, activating a response in him tells Tae-guk we're onto the network. If he's still active, Jun-seo picked up his phone. I need to know what he's currently being asked to deliver before I remove the channel. Daewon gathered the papers, replaced them in the folder, stood. He paused at the kitchen doorway. How bad is it? He said. Not operationally, personally. Daewon had been with him long enough to ask the distinction. Jun-seo looked at him. Hyun-gi knew everything, he said. Everything I thought was protected. Everything I built for 15 years that I believed no one outside of 3 people understood. He paused. It's bad. Daewon nodded once. He left. Zuri was eating toast. She had found the bread in the kitchen. The apartment stocked supplies extending to a half loaf of white bread and a jar of strawberry jam, and had made herself breakfast with the unself-conscious competence of a child who had learned early that waiting for adults to notice your needs was inefficient. She was sitting cross-legged on the counter, which Nia had told her twice to stop, and which she had technically stopped and technically resumed in a way that maintained the letter of the instruction. She looked up when Jun-seo came into the kitchen. She looked at him with the direct, unfiltered assessment of a child who had not yet learned that staring was rude, and who would probably not have stopped even if she had. You didn't sleep, she said. No. Mom says people who don't sleep get mean. Your mom is right. Zuri considered this. You don't seem mean. The morning is young. Something moved in her face. A recognition. A pleasure. The expression of a child registering a specific flavor of adult humor that she understood was being offered to her as a form of respect. She held out the jam jar. There's more bread, she said. He looked at the jar. At this 7-year-old girl sitting on a kitchen counter in a safe house, offering him jam with complete natural authority, as if the situation were entirely ordinary, as if she had always lived in a world where this was where breakfast happened. He sat down on the stool at the kitchen island. He accepted the jam. Nia appeared in the doorway. She looked at the two of them. Something moved across her face that she controlled quickly. Not displeasure. Something more complicated than that. The look of a woman watching a thing she had tried to prepare herself not to feel anything about. I need to make a call, she said to Jun-seo. Privately. He stood, left the kitchen, gave her the room. He stood in the hallway and listened to Zuri hum something tuneless while she finished her toast, and listened to the low, careful register of Nia's voice through the door. Not the words, just the shape of them. The particular cadence of a person who was calling someone they hadn't intended to need. Her mother in Chicago, he thought. He recognized the specific architecture of that kind of call without hearing it. He went to the main room and picked up his own phone. 3 missed messages from Daewon, sent in the past 20 minutes. He opened the first one. Sejin has been active since we last spoke. He sent a communication after you instructed the passive monitoring. He wasn't scheduled to report. Jun-seo opened the second message. The communication wasn't to Tae-guk's usual channel. Different number. We're running it now. Third message. Boss. The number traces to Hyun-gi's personal device. He stood in the main room of the safe house and looked at those words. Sejin and Hyun-gi were communicating directly. Not through Tae-guk's network as the intermediary. Directly. Which meant the structure wasn't what he'd mapped. It wasn't Tae-guk at the center with 2 separate spokes extending to his compromised contacts. It was a triangle. Sejin and Hyun-gi had been coordinating with each other, and both of them were feeding Tae-guk, which meant the intelligence bleed was not contained to what either man knew independently. It was the combination. Sejin had operational calendar access. Hyun-gi had financial architecture access. Together, they had everything. Movement patterns plus asset maps. The complete picture of how Jun-seo's organization functioned, where it was vulnerable, when it was exposed. He called Daewon. How long? He said when Daewon picked up. How long have Sejin and Hyun-gi been communicating directly? We're still mapping it, but the earliest exchange we've recovered is a pause, the sound of typing. 14 months ago. 14 months. The exact same point when Tae-guk had begun monitoring the family in Itaewon. Not coincidence. Coordination. The triangle had been assembled simultaneously. Sejin and Hyun-gi brought into alignment at the same moment Tae-guk identified the family as the emotional lever. The whole operation had been architected in a single move, 14 months ago, and Jun-seo had spent 14 months inside it without seeing the walls. Sejin's message to Hyun-gi, he said. What did it say? 4 words. We cracked it 20 minutes ago. Daewon's voice had something in it that Jun-seo had not heard in 14 years of working together. A quality that was not quite reluctance, but was adjacent to it. The sound of a man delivering information he would prefer not to be delivering. It said, he stayed. Begin transfer. The call was silent. He stayed. Sejin had been watching. Somehow, a contact near the safe house, a surveillance asset Jun-seo hadn't identified, something Sejin had confirmed that Jun-seo had remained in the safe house through the night with the family rather than returning to Gangnam, and that confirmation had triggered the next phase. Begin transfer. What transfer? Jun-seo said. He heard his own voice come out flat and without any of the things moving underneath it. The Singapore account. The primary offshore instrument, not the exposed secondary structures. The primary one. Someone initiated a transfer instruction at 6:47 this morning. Hyun-gi had the authentication codes. Jun-seo pressed his hand flat against the wall of the main room. How much? The full liquid position, $43 million equivalent. He stood with his hand on the wall and his phone against his ear and his breathing controlled, deliberately controlled, because control was the only thing that existed right now that was useful. Stop the transfer, he said. We can't. The authentication was valid, Hyun-gi's codes, routed through the correct channels. By the time our banking contact can flag it as unauthorized, the clearance window will have... Daewon stopped. Boss, the clearance window closes in 40 minutes. We don't have the standing to challenge a valid authentication in 40 minutes. Then challenge it as fraudulent. That triggers an automatic freeze on all associated instruments. Everything connected to that account, the Singapore holdings, the Cayman linkages, the 3 development holdings that share the same ownership architecture, all of it freezes pending investigation. It protects the assets, but it collapses operational access for how long? Minimum 90 days, more likely 6 months, depending on which authorities pick up the investigation flag. 6 months. 6 months without access to the financial infrastructure that ran the legitimate businesses, the payroll, the operating accounts of 12 enterprises that had real employees doing real work. 6 months of freeze while an investigation mapped the architecture that Hyun-gi had been quietly documenting for 3 years. And at the end of it, not recovery, exposure. He took his hand off the wall. Flag it, he said. Boss, flag it as fraudulent. Freeze everything. He paused. The alternative is letting Tae-guk take $43 million and use it to fund whatever comes next, which I'm not going to do. A long pause. Yes, sir. He ended the call. He stood in the main room of the safe house. Through the wall, he could hear Zuri, still humming. Through the kitchen door, he could hear Nia wrapping up her call in a voice that had the particular quality of someone who has asked for something they didn't want to ask for, and has received it and is now trying to sound like receiving it is not the relief it is. He had just triggered the collapse of his own financial architecture to prevent a theft he should have prevented 14 months ago. His 2 most trusted long-term internal contacts had been working against him for 3 years and 14 months respectively, and had been coordinating directly for all of that time. He had less than 40 minutes before the freeze executed, after which the legal exposure began. And somewhere in a Yoido office tower, Oh Tae-guk was watching a message that said he stayed and understanding that the emotional lever had worked exactly as designed. The kitchen door opened. Nia came into the hallway. She looked at him, at his posture, at his face, at whatever was present in his expression that he no longer had the overhead to suppress completely. What happened? She said. He looked at her. He thought about what it cost to tell the truth in a situation where the truth reduced you. He thought about the 11 years since anyone had seen him in a moment he hadn't controlled and chosen. They moved, he said, while I was here. They used the fact that I was here to trigger the next phase. Someone confirmed my location and signaled the financial operation. She absorbed that. So being here, she said, staying, that was part of their plan. Yes. Her eyes were steady on his. And you knew. Last night, You said Taeguk wanted you distracted. You knew staying was a risk. I assessed the risk as manageable. And? He looked at her directly. I was wrong. Nia looked at him for a long moment. The controlled face, the careful eyes, the specific expression of a woman processing the information that the dangerous man who had inserted himself into her life had miscalculated in a way that was going to have consequences, and that those consequences were going to reach her. Then Zuri came out of the kitchen with jam on her chin and her sketchbook under her arm. She looked at both of them with the uncomplicated clarity of a child reading the room. Something bad happened, she said. Neither of them answered. Zuri opened her sketchbook. She flipped past drawings until she found a blank page. She sat down cross-legged on the hallway floor and began to draw, the way she always drew when the adult world became something she couldn't affect and could only witness. Junseo watched her draw. He thought about the financial freeze executing and he checked his phone. 31 minutes. About Hyun-gi in his office. About Se-jin at his desk. About Taeguk and Yoido, looking at a confirmed signal and understanding that his year of patience was now entering its final phase. He thought about 3 people in a safe house hallway, 2 of them watching a 7-year-old girl draw with the focused peace of someone who believed, with complete and unqualified certainty, that the man in her drawings was capable of fixing the things that were broken. He had spent 20 years building an empire on the premise that he owed nothing to anyone and that isolation was protection. That premise had just cost him $43 million, and the clean operation he had built for 15 years, triggered not by an enemy's strength, but by his own unwillingness to leave a safe house and go back to his penthouse. He had stayed because of them. He did not regret staying. That was the thing he couldn't account for, the thing that sat outside all his calculus and refused to behave like data. He had stayed, and it had cost him enormously, and somewhere underneath the loss, in a place that had no business existing in the chest of a man who had ordered people buried under concrete, there was something that felt like the answer to a question The freeze executed at 7:22 in the morning. Junseo felt it the way you feel a building shift, not a sound exactly, more a change in the quality of the air, the specific sensation of something structural giving way. His phone registered 3 notifications in rapid succession as the banking protocols cascaded. He didn't look at them. He already knew what they said. Day 1 called 11 seconds later. It's done, Day 1 said. All associated instruments are frozen. The investigation flag is active. Acknowledged. There's something else. A pause that had weight in it. Taeguk's people just moved on the Mappo restaurant. 4 men, 40 minutes ago. They didn't go inside. They documented the exterior. Photographed the vehicles. Our contact inside the building next door says they were running plates. The Mappo restaurant. The back room where Junseo had received the photograph of the drawing, where Day 1 had laid the first file on the table. He's mapping our meeting locations, Junseo said. He already has the map. He's confirming it's still current. Another pause. Boss, if he has Hyun-gi's financial architecture and Se-jin's operational calendar, he knows our standard secure locations. All of them. Junseo looked down the hallway of the safe house. Nia was sitting against the wall with her knees up, her phone in her hand, reading something on the screen with the focused economy of someone managing multiple problems simultaneously. Zuri was still drawing on the floor, her pencil moving with the steady concentration of a child who had found the frequency where everything else fell away. This location, Junseo said. Is it in Se-jin's calendar access? The pause before Day 1's answer was 2 seconds too long. Yes, Day 1 said. Junseo was already moving. Nia. His voice came out flat and direct, and she looked up immediately, reading the register. We need to leave. Now. She didn't ask why. She stood in a single movement, reached down, put her hand on Zuri's shoulder. Baby, pack your book, we're going. Zuri looked up. Read the room the way she always read rooms. Fast, accurate, without the filters that adults constructed between perception and response. She closed her sketchbook. She stood, 40 seconds from Junseo's instruction to all 3 of them moving down the stairwell. He had his hand on Nia's arm, not gripping, just present, the physical language of this way, this pace. And Zuri was on Nia's other side, the sketchbook under her arm, her small face set with a seriousness that was too old for 7, and that Junseo felt in his chest like something sharp, They came out through the building's service exit into a narrow lane. One of his vehicles was already moving. Daewon had called ahead, which meant Daewon had already run the same calculation Junseo had run and had been 30 seconds ahead of him. The vehicle took them east. Junseo sat in the back with his phone and the specific quality of attention of a man doing triage, identifying what could still be saved, in what order, at what cost. The financial architecture was frozen. The meeting locations were burned. 2 internal contacts were compromised but still in place. Taeguk had a 14-month head start on planning and had just confirmed that Junseo's primary financial response was now locked out. What Taeguk did not have was Junseo himself. Not yet. He pulled up the organizational map on his phone. The secondary contacts. The relationships that existed outside the formal structure. The ones that didn't appear in Sejin's calendars or Hyungi's financial records, because they had been built not through the organization, but through 20 years of direct personal history. There were 7 of them. 7 people who owed Junseo things that couldn't be documented. He started making calls. The second safe location was a commercial unit in Seongdong, a working print shop on the ground floor with a residential space above it that had been maintained under a separate ownership chain that neither Sejin nor Hyungi had ever had reason to access. The shop owner was a woman in her 60s named Mrs. Baek, who had been connected to Junseo's network for 9 years through a debt of a type that had nothing to do with money, and who let them in through the back without a word, and went downstairs and turned on the printing machines to provide cover noise. Zuri sat on a low bench with her sketchbook and drew. Nia stood at the room's single window and looked at the street below. She had her arms crossed over her chest and her jaw set in the way that had become familiar to Junseo in the past 12 hours. Not closed off, exactly, but carrying. The posture of a woman who was managing the awareness that her life had moved outside the boundaries of anything she knew how to navigate, and who was refusing to let that awareness become paralysis. He finished the last call. He sat down at the room's table. His body was registering the absence of sleep now, a heaviness behind his eyes, a slight imprecision in his peripheral vision that he compensated for by keeping his focus narrow and close. "Tell me what's happening," Naya said without turning from the window. "The location we were in was compromised. Someone in my organization has been feeding our operational details to the man who set this up. We're in a clean location now." "How clean?" "Clean enough." She turned from the window. "That's not an answer. It's the most accurate answer I have right now." He met her eyes. "The man running this operation is named Oh Tae-guk. He's been building this approach for over a year. This morning he triggered a financial move that I've blocked, but that created its own damage. He now knows the block happened, which means he knows his primary leverage over my finances didn't work the way he planned." "What does that mean for us?" "It means he accelerates." Junseo paused, said the next part without ornament because she would identify ornament immediately. "When a man who has been patient for 14 months loses his primary move, he goes to his secondary. His secondary is you." The room was quiet except for the low percussion of the printing machines below and the sound of Zuri's pencil on paper. Nia's expression didn't collapse. He had expected it to. The information was designed to collapse people. She took it and stood in it, and her eyes went through a series of adjustments that he recognized as the processing of someone who has received fear and is deciding how to use it rather than be used by it. "What does that look like?" she said. "He takes you, uses you as leverage to bring me to a location of his choosing under conditions he controls." He kept his voice level. "That's the standard architecture for this kind of move. Remove the financial options, then remove the personal ones." "And what do you do when he does that?" "I come and get you." "And walk into exactly the trap he's been building for 14 months. "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. "So the solution is to not let him take me in the first place." "That's the first part of the solution." "What's the second part?" "I go to him before he comes to us." He held her gaze. "I stop defending, and I move." The call came at 11:43. Not to Junseo's phone. To Daewon's, routed through a number that was clean and public and entirely unthreatening. A logistics company, standard business contact. The message was brief and was forwarded to Junseo within 90 seconds. It contained an address, a shipping terminal in Incheon on the harbor's industrial western edge. It contained a time, 9 o'clock that evening, and it contained 4 words that were not a message so much as a demonstration. Bring the woman. Alone. Below those 4 words was a photograph. The photograph showed Se-jin. Se-jin was sitting in what appeared to be a basement room, his wrists zip-tied to the arms of a chair, his face carrying the specific arrangement of someone who had just understood that they had been used and discarded simultaneously. He was looking at the camera with an expression that Jun-seo had seen on other faces in other rooms. The expression of a man who had made a calculation that turned out to be wrong in a final way. Taeguk had burned his own asset. Jun-seo stared at the photograph. Taeguk had taken Se-jin, his own planted contact inside Jun-seo's organization, and was now using him as a message. The message was not "we have your man." Jun-seo felt nothing about Se-jin that resembled the concern Taeguk would need him to feel. The message was something else. The message was, "I am cleaning house. I don't need the infrastructure anymore. I'm done building. I'm here." He had been patient for 14 months. He was done being patient. Jun-seo showed Daewon the message. He watched Daewon read it and watched the careful professional mask do the thing it occasionally did under extreme circumstances, a slight tightening around the mouth that was the only sign of what was underneath. "He's moving tonight," Daewon said. "Yes." "The terminal in Incheon. You know it?" "I know of it. Taeguk has holdings in the Western Industrial Zone. The terminal will be on his operational ground." Jun-seo set the phone face down. He chose it because it's contained. Harbor on one side, industrial access roads on the other, limited entry points. He'll have the entry points covered. "Yes." Daewon looked at him. "You're going." It was not a question. 14 years of reading this man meant Daewon already knew the answer. He was confirming it. "I'm going," Jun-seo said. He said alone. He said, "Bring the woman alone." "I'm not bringing the woman." Jun-seo picked up his phone. "I'm going alone. You and the others will move on the terminal separately. Different approach vectors. I need Taeguk's attention on me." Daewon was quiet for a moment. "If he has the terminal locked down and you're inside without support position before he knows we're there, then I need you positioned before he knows you're there." Another pause. "How much time?" 4 hours? Incheon terminal? 4 hours. Different approach vectors. Daewon did the calculation visibly, running it against whatever he knew about the terminal's geography, Taeguk's known personnel numbers, the access roads. "I'll need everything we have available. Use everything." Daewon left. Jun-seo sat at the table in the print shop's back room. Above the low percussion of the machines below, he could hear Zuri humming again. The tuneless sound she made when she was drawing something she was satisfied with. He looked at the wall in front of him and let himself feel, for the precise duration of 60 seconds, everything he had been holding behind the wall. The betrayal. 12 years and 3 years, and the specific quality of rage that came not from being attacked, but from being known and used by someone who had been trusted with the knowing. Hyungi. The financial architecture that had taken 15 years to build, now frozen under investigation, its map in the hands of an enemy. Se-jin in a basement somewhere, the instrument discarded by the hand that had deployed it. And underneath all of it, deeper than the operational damage, deeper than the strategic loss, the knowledge that the thing Taeguk had used against him was real. The attachment was real. The way he felt sitting in this back room listening to a 7-year-old girl hum while she drew was real. And Taeguk had correctly identified it as the only opening in 20 years of armor, and had been right. 60 seconds. Then he stood up and went to find Nia. She was in the narrow kitchen space at the back of the room, standing at a counter with a cup of coffee that Mrs. Baek had made and that had gone cold while Nia thought. She looked up when he came in. He handed her his phone, the message from Taeguk on the screen. She read it. He watched her read it. He watched the controlled face do its work, and then watched the work get harder. "He wants me there," she said. "He wants me to bring you. I'm not bringing you." He held her gaze. "I'm going alone. I'm going tonight. I need you to stay here with Zuri until Daewon's people come back. And if you don't come back, Daewon has instructions. He'll get you out of Seoul, funds that exist outside the frozen architecture, cash, clean accounts that Hyungi never touched. You and Zuri will have what you need to go wherever you need to go." She set the phone down. She looked at him with an expression that had too many things in it to separate cleanly. You've already planned for the version where you don't make it. I plan for every version. That's not comforting. It's not supposed to be comforting. It's supposed to be accurate. She looked at the counter, at the cold coffee, at her own hands flat on the surface. I don't want to have this conversation where I tell you to be careful and you say something that sounds like a goodbye. Then don't. Junso. The name came out different from the way she'd refused to use it the night before. No formality now. Just the name, with the weight she'd been keeping off it until this moment. Whatever Taeguk did, whatever he used, what Zuri drew, that's not something someone manufactured. I need you to know that I know that. She paused. Because if you walk into that terminal thinking that the thing you're walking into it for might not be real, then you don't have what you need. He looked at her. He thought about the photograph of the drawing that Daewon had placed on the table in the Mapo restaurant. The three figures, the golden sky, the crayon warmth of it. He thought about a 3-year-old girl drawing a man she had never seen and drawing him for 4 years with the absolute patient certainty of someone who knew how a story ended and was simply waiting for it to arrive. He thought about staying in the safe house instead of returning to the Gangnam penthouse, the choice that had cost him $43 million and the operational architecture of his life. He did not regret it. I know it's real, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something that she hadn't done before. She reached out and put her hand briefly on his forearm. Not a grip, just a touch. The physical language of I see you. Come back. He looked down at her hand. He nodded. He went to find Zuri. She was still drawing. Of course she was. He sat beside her on the low bench and looked at the current page of the sketchbook. She had been working on it for the past hour, and it was more detailed than her usual work. More careful, the lines more deliberate. 3 figures again, as always, but this time the setting was specific. A harbor. Water in the background, rendered in the particular way she drew water, with layered horizontal strokes. A large, dark building. And the 3 figures standing in front of it, facing something outside the frame. He looked at the harbor in the drawing, at the dark building, at the 3 figures standing before it. Zuri, he said. She kept drawing. I have to go somewhere tonight. The pencil slowed. Alone? Yes. She looked up. Her eyes were steady on his. The direct, unfiltered assessment that he had learned in the past 12 hours to understand as the most honest attention he had ever received from another human being. Is it dangerous? Some. Are you going because of us? He paused. Partly. She looked at the drawing in her lap, at the harbor and the dark building and the 3 figures. She looked at it for a while. Then she carefully tore the page from the sketchbook, cleanly along the binding, and held it out to him. Take it, she said. He looked at the drawing. Zuri, take it. Her voice had the absolute certainty that all the most important things she said had. So you know what you're coming back to. He took the drawing. He looked at it for a moment, at the 3 figures standing at the harbor. He folded it carefully. He put it in the inside pocket of his coat, against his chest. Zuri watched him do it. Then she turned back to the blank page in her sketchbook and began drawing again, the pencil moving with the calm of someone who had said what needed to be said and was now returning to work. Patam. The Incheon terminal materialized out of the harbor dark at 8:51. Jonseo walked in through the eastern access gate, not the main entry, not the approach that Taeguk would have covered first, but a service entrance on the water side that required moving through 40 meters of unlit concrete and the specific physicality of a man who had learned in his teens that darkness was a resource, not a liability. The harbor smell was diesel and brine and the cold that came off open water at night. His breath was visible. His body was telling him things. The elevated heart rate, the sweat at the back of his neck despite the cold, the particular sharpness of sensory detail that arrived when the situation was real. He was not carrying a weapon. He had made the decision deliberately. Walking into Taeguk's prepared ground with a weapon would accomplish nothing. He would be searched and disarmed before he reached the room, and carrying would signal that he had brought confrontation rather than negotiation. He needed Tae-guk to talk before day one's people were in position. Needed the room to stay conversational long enough for the exterior to change. The terminal's interior was a massive open warehouse space. Steel girders, concrete floor, the specific cavernous echo of an empty industrial building, shipping containers stacked along the far walls. Overhead lights hung at intervals, but only half of them were working, which created alternating pools of yellow light and shadow that stretched the space into something that felt much larger than it was. Tae-guk was standing in the center pool of light. He was smaller than Junseo had expected. Shorter, thinner, with the neat appearance of a man who managed from behind other people's physical presence. He was wearing a dark suit that was slightly too formal for a shipping terminal, and looking at Junseo's approach with the expression of someone who has waited a long time for something and is now experiencing the slightly anticlimactic reality of its arrival. 6 men flanked him, positioned with professional precision, 2 behind, 2 to each side, with lines of sight that covered the entrance Junseo had come through and the 2 secondary access points. Junseo noted each position without looking at them directly, the peripheral inventory of a man who had learned to see rooms completely. He stopped 10 feet from Tae-guk. "You came alone," Tae-guk said. "You said alone." "I said bring the woman alone. You weren't supposed to leave her behind." "Then your message was unclear." Tae-guk looked at him. A long, flat assessment. "You're not carrying." "No." "That's either very confident or very stupid." "Both, probably." Junseo held his gaze. "Where's Sejin?" Tae-guk tilted his head slightly. "Somewhere. He served his purpose." "He's your asset." "He was. Assets have expiration dates." A pause. "You're not angry about Sejin?" "No." "What about Hyun-gi? 12 years, that one should have hurt." Junseo said nothing. Something moved in Tae-guk's expression. Not satisfaction exactly, more the look of a man confirming a hypothesis. "It did hurt. You're just very practiced at not showing it." He clasped his hands in front of him. "You know what surprised me about you, Kang Junseo? In 6 years of study, your finances were impressive. Your operational discipline was impressive. But neither of those things were where I found the door. The drawings. The drawings." Tae-guk smiled thinly. A 3-year-old girl with an extraordinary imagination and a face she couldn't have seen. "I found out about them before the article. A contact near the school. Mundane surveillance of a neighborhood you were nowhere near. I saw the drawings and I thought, this is the door, not the money, not the empire." He paused. "The missing piece." Junseo looked at him steadily. His heartbeat was elevated. He kept his breathing level. "You built a year of operation on a child's drawings," he said. "I built a year of operation on what the drawings revealed about you, that you were hollow in a specific place. That the right thing in that hollow would make you careless." Tae-guk paused. "I was right." "You were right," Junseo said. "I was careless. The financial architecture is frozen, 2 of my contacts are burned, and I'm standing in your terminal without a weapon." He held the smaller man's gaze. "And I'm still here, which means your calculation had an error in it somewhere." Tae-guk looked at him. For the first time, something shifted beneath the neat, formal surface. A very small recalibration. The expression of a man who is running a rapid assessment and finding a variable that doesn't match. "You came to negotiate," Tae-guk said. "I came to end it." "Those are different things." "Yes. You have nothing to negotiate with. The financial architecture is frozen by your own action, which I'll admit I didn't expect. But frozen serves my purpose nearly as well as taken. The investigation exposure alone will be managed," Junseo said. "The accounts you mapped through Hyun-gi are 3 layers removed from the primary holdings. By the time any investigation reaches anything actionable, the structure will have been reorganized. Hyun-gi knew the old architecture, not what it becomes." Tae-guk was quiet for a moment, recalculating. "You're bluffing," he said. "Maybe." Junseo paused. "But you spent 14 months building this approach, and the primary move didn't work the way you needed it to. The woman isn't here. Sejin is burned. You have 6 men and a building and a time pressure you didn't plan for." He held the man's gaze. "How long before your outside contacts start wondering why the operation hasn't resolved?" Something changed in Tae-guk's eyes. The flat certainty shifted. Not much, not enough to call it fear, but enough. The recalculation was happening. "Take him," Tae-guk said. The 6 men moved. Junseo had 3 seconds from the instruction to the arrival of the first man, and he used all 3 of them. Not to fight. He was 1 man without a weapon against 6 positioned professionals, and he understood the arithmetic. He used the 3 seconds to move laterally into the nearest shadow column, away from the lit center, and to put something solid at his back. The first man reached him in the dark, and Junseo broke his grip and moved again, taking a hit to his left ribs that sent bright pain through his side and told him the man's training was real. He kept moving. The darkness was partial cover, enough to complicate the coordination, not enough to last. His ribs were screaming. He breathed through it. His phone, in his pocket, vibrated once. Daewon's signal. In position. Outside the terminal, Junseo knew the geometry of the situation was changing. He needed 30 more seconds. He needed Tae-guk's attention in this room on him while the outside changed. He stopped moving. He stepped back into the light. "Enough," he said. The men stopped. Tae-guk looked at him, at the controlled breathing, the hand pressed against his left side where the rib hit had landed. "You're done running," Tae-guk said. "I wasn't running." Junseo took his hand away from his ribs, met Tae-guk's eyes. "I was waiting." From outside the terminal came a sound, not loud, more a change in the ambient register, the particular shift in background noise that meant the outside of a building had acquired a presence it hadn't had before. Tae-guk heard it. His eyes moved to his men. One of the men near the side access point pressed his earpiece. His expression changed. "Sir," the man said. Tae-guk looked at Junseo. Junseo looked back at him with the specific flat expression of a man who has been patient for exactly as long as the situation required and is now entirely done being patient. "You said I had nothing to negotiate with," Junseo said. "You were measuring the wrong things." He held Tae-guk's gaze across the yellow-lit concrete floor of the terminal. "You spent 14 months trying to find out what I cared about. You found it, and then you threatened it." His voice stayed level, controlled, with the full weight of 20 years of surviving in it. "That was your error, Tae-guk. Not the money, not Sejin, not the financial architecture." He paused. "You made it personal." Outside, the sounds multiplied. Tae-guk's man pressed his earpiece again. His face had gone the color of someone receiving information through a wire that is telling them the situation outside no longer resembles the situation that was planned. He looked at Tae-guk and said 3 words. "All entry points." Tae-guk looked at the 6 men around him. He looked at the terminal's walls as if they had betrayed him. He looked at Junseo standing in the center of the light with his ribs broken or close to it and his breathing controlled and his eyes completely steady. He reached into his jacket. Junseo saw the movement and understood it and did not move back. "Don't," he said. The terminal door behind Tae-guk opened. Not Daewon's people. A single figure, small, moving with the particular quality of someone who had arrived at a place they had always known they were going to arrive at and had simply been waiting for the right moment. Nia Brooks stood in the doorway of the Incheon terminal with her arms at her sides and her eyes finding Junseo across the concrete and the darkness, and the 6 positioned men with the straight, direct certainty of a woman who had decided that staying behind was the wrong. The terminal went completely still. Not quiet. The harbor sounds continued outside, the ambient groan of steel and water, the distant machinery of a port that never fully slept. But inside, in the space between the yellow overhead lights and the concrete floor and the 6 men who had stopped moving, something froze in the specific way that situations froze when a variable appeared that no one had planned for. Nia Brooks stood in the doorway. She was not supposed to be here. That was visible in every face in the room. In Tae-guk's rapid recalculation, in the positioning uncertainty of the 6 men who had clear instructions for a scenario that had just changed, in the particular tightening around Junseo's eyes, that was the only sign of what was moving underneath. She had a cut on her left forearm. Small, already clotting, the kind of cut that came from moving through something that had an edge she hadn't seen. Her breathing was controlled but costing her. the chest movement of someone who had been running and was performing steadiness over the effort. She had come through the back of the building, through whatever Daewon's entry had left accessible, and she had done it alone. She looked at Junseo across the terminal. He looked back at her, and his expression did the thing it had been doing since the narrow street in Itaewon, the crack in the surface, the involuntary revision of a face that had been trained not to revise. "I told you to stay," he said. "I know." "Nia, Zuri is with Mrs. Beck." Her voice was level. "She's safe. She knows I'll come back." She moved her eyes to Taeguk, standing with his hand still inside his jacket, the calculation in his face working visibly. "And I'm not going to sit in a back room while someone uses me as an excuse for whatever happens in this building." Taeguk looked at her, then at Junseo. Something shifted in his expression, not the recalculation anymore. Something that had cleared past calculation into a simpler territory, the look of a man who has removed one uncertainty from his planning. He took his hand out of his jacket. He was holding a phone, not a weapon. He pressed a single button. From the eastern side of the terminal, a separate structure connected by a covered walkway that Junseo had not fully mapped from the exterior, a door opened. Two of Taeguk's men came through it. Between them, moving with the careful gait of someone managing pain, was Park Hyun-gi. Junseo looked at him. Hyun-gi was 51 years old and had the appearance tonight of a man who had aged considerably in the past several hours. His suit jacket was missing. His face carried the specific arrangement of someone who has spent time in a room being asked questions by people who considered his comfort irrelevant. His wrists were bound with a zip tie that he was holding in front of him with the posture of someone trying to minimize the visibility of his own restraint. He would not look at Junseo. That avoidance was its own language. "I want to be clear about where we are," Taeguk said. His voice had recovered its professional register, the formal, measured quality of a man reestablishing the terms of a conversation. "Your financial architecture is frozen, your operational security is burned, and the man who built your financial infrastructure for 12 years has been in this building for the past 4 hours, explaining the parts that didn't make it into his documentation." He paused. "I didn't need the primary account. I needed the time." Junseo understood immediately. The transfer, the 43 million he had flagged as fraudulent, triggering the freeze. That had been Taeguk's visible move, the move designed to force the freeze. The freeze itself was the goal. While Junseo's people had been managing the banking protocols, managing Seijin, managing the safe house relocation, and the preparation for Incheon, while all of that was consuming the morning, Taeguk had had Hyun-gi. 4 hours of Hyun-gi. "What did he give you?" Junseo said. Hyun-gi's head dropped slightly. The answer was in the movement, the specific physical language of someone who has given everything and knows it, and is living in the first moments of understanding what that means. "The secondary holdings," Taeguk said. "The ones that exist under the legitimate business architecture. The ones that are, let's say, adjacent to legally defensible. The ones that a properly motivated investigation, with the right documentation delivered to the right desks, would find most interesting." He tilted his head slightly. "Not for prosecution. Prosecution takes years and costs money and requires more certainty than I prefer. For negotiation, for a permanent arrangement. You want a cut," Junseo said. "I want a partnership." Taeguk paused on the word with the precision of a man who has chosen it carefully. 14 months of work. This isn't a robbery. This is a restructuring. The terminal was silent except for the harbor sounds. Junseo looked at Hyun-gi, who was still not looking at him. He looked at the zip tie on the man's wrists, at the downward angle of the head, at 12 years accumulated in the posture of a person who had made a choice 3 years ago and was now located at its endpoint, with no version of the next hour that returned him to anything he recognized. "Look at me," Junseo said. "Junseo ma." Hyun-gi looked up. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had been carrying something for 3 years and had been waiting without knowing it for the moment when the carrying stopped because the thing was finally out in the open and there was nothing left to protect. "Why?" Junseo said. One word. He didn't mean the operation or the money or the tactical reasoning. He meant the 12 years. Hyun-gi's jaw moved. The words took a moment to arrive, passing through the specific effort of a man who has rehearsed a justification for years and finds, in the actual moment of delivery, that it has lost all structural integrity. Because I built it, he said. His voice was rough in the way of voices that had been used hard in the past several hours. 15 years I built it. The architecture, the instruments, every structure that made your operation functional. He stopped, started again. And you were the name on all of it. Not the hands. You were never the hands on the financial side. I was the hands. For 15 years. His eyes held Jun Seo's with the specific quality of pain that had been converted into grievance, which was its own kind of damage. Taeguk offered me my own name on something. The terminal was very quiet. He offered you credit, Jun Seo said. He offered me authorship. Hyungi's voice broke slightly on the word and then restabilized. There's a difference. Jun Seo looked at him for a long moment. He thought about 15 years of a man's work, absorbed into a structure that bore someone else's name. He thought about the particular invisibility of competence in a world that rewarded visible power. He thought about what it cost a person to build something extraordinary and have it attributed entirely to the person they built it for. He understood it. He did not forgive it. But he understood it. And in the specific damaged way that understanding arrived, when it was also too late to be useful, he felt it land in him and settle. I know, he said. Hyungi blinked. It was not the response he had prepared for. You should have told me, Junso said. 12 years ago, 3 years ago, any point in between. He held the older man's gaze. You should have told me. The silence that followed was not empty. It had the specific weight of a thing that was true and could not be taken back and did not have a resolution that made anyone feel better about it. Taeguk cleared his throat, the sound of a man reclaiming the room's agenda. This is very moving, he said, but we have a partnership to discuss. Junseo turned his attention from Hyungi back to Taeguk. The shift was complete. Whatever had been present in his face during the exchange with Hyungi was gone, replaced by the flat, controlled surface that had served him through 20 years of situations that required him to be the most certain presence in any room he occupied. No, he said. Taeguk looked at him. Not a partnership, Junso said. Not a restructuring, not an arrangement. He held Taeguk's gaze with the specific, unwavering quality of a man who has arrived at a position he has no intention of leaving. You've been building toward leverage for 14 months. The leverage doesn't work the way you need it to. I have Hyungi's documentation, which exposes my secondary holdings and triggers an investigation that damages both of us. You're not positioned to benefit from my collapse. You're positioned to benefit from my cooperation. Those are very different threats. Junso paused. You can release the documentation. The investigation freezes my assets for 6 to 12 months, damages the secondary holdings, creates significant legal exposure. I survive it. It costs me. And then, when it's over, you have burned the only leverage you spent 14 months building, and I'm still here. Taeguk's jaw had tightened slightly. The recalculation was visible now, running faster, less composed, with the friction of a man who is realizing that the architecture of his plan has a flaw he did not account for. Or, Junseo continued, you release the woman. You release Hyungi. You walk out of this terminal with the understanding that this ends here. No partnership, no arrangement. You take what you've built in Yoido and you maintain it without ever moving in my direction again. He let a pause land. Those are your options. Those aren't options, Taeguk said. Those are you telling me to accept nothing. I'm telling you to accept survival. Junseo's voice hadn't changed in volume or register. It had simply acquired a quality that the room felt, a density, a specificity, the particular weight of words from a man who means them in a way that is not rhetorical. You were careful for 14 months. You were patient. You built something with real architecture. That deserves acknowledgement. He paused. But you built it toward a target that decided the thing you were using against him was worth more than the empire you were threatening. That changes the mathematics. Taeguk looked at Nia. She was standing 10 feet inside the doorway, not moving, watching the exchange with the controlled attention of someone who understood that this moment required stillness above all other things. Then Taeguk looked at Junseo. At the hand Junseo had pressed against his ribs, still carrying the hit from earlier, the pain visible only in the slight rigidity of the posture, the controlled breathing that was costing more than it appeared to cost. You came in here without a weapon, Taeguk said slowly. Yes, because you knew I'd search you. Because I came to end this, not to fight it. And if I don't accept your terms. Junseo looked at him. Then Daiwan comes in, and this becomes a different kind of conversation. A pause. I'd rather it didn't. The terminal held the silence for a long moment. Outside, somewhere beyond the walls, the harbor continued its indifferent machinery. Water against steel. The movement of things too large to stop. Taeguk looked at his 6 men. He looked at the 2 men holding Hyun-gi. He looked at the phone in his hand. The documentation, the leverage, the 14 months of careful construction. He looked at Junseo, who was standing in the center of a terminal with broken ribs and no weapon, and a woman who had walked through the back of a building to stand beside him, and whose face had the expression of a man who has decided with complete finality what he is and is not willing to lose. Taeguk put the phone in his jacket pocket. Cut him loose, he said to the men holding Hyun-gi. One of them produced a blade. The zip tie fell. Hyun-gi stood with his wrists free and his hands hanging at his sides, and the particular posture of a man who does not know what to do with the space that has just opened up around him. Taeguk looked at Junseo one final time. There was something in his expression that was not defeat exactly. More the look of a man cataloging the precise point where his calculation diverged from reality, filing it away with the cold professionalism of someone who intends to learn from it. This isn't finished, Taeguk said. It is, Junseo said. You just don't know it yet. Taeguk walked toward the eastern exit. His men followed. The terminal's acoustics tracked their footsteps. 6 sets, then the 2 who had held Hyun-gi, then the sound of the eastern door opening and the brief intrusion of harbor air, and then the door closing and the sound diminishing across the external ground, and then nothing. They were gone. Junseo stood in the empty terminal. He took one careful breath, then another. His ribs registered each one with specific, immediate complaint. He pressed his hand against his left side and felt the particular heat of damaged tissue and noted the information the way he noted all physical information, as data, as something to manage, not as something to perform. He looked at Hyun-gi. Hyun-gi was standing near the far wall, his freed wrists held slightly apart from his body, as if he hadn't yet reintegrated the information that they were no longer bound. He was looking at the floor. He looked old in the way that people looked old when they had been carrying something for a long time, and had just put it down, and the weight of the carrying was suddenly visible in its absence. Go home, Junseo said. Hyun-gi looked up. Go home tonight. Tomorrow morning, come to the Gangnam office and hand everything to Day One. Every document, every record, everything you kept. After that, Junseo paused. Let the sentence complete itself in the space between them. Hyun-gi understood. The after that was the after that, the end of 12 years, the end of the architecture he had built, and the name he had built it under, and the quiet, compounding resentment that had made him a trapdoor in the floor of Junseo's world. I'm sorry, Hyun-gi said. Junseo looked at him for a long moment. I know, he said. It was not forgiveness. It was not the absence of consequence. It was something more specific and harder to name. The acknowledgement that a person could be both genuinely sorry and genuinely culpable, and that both of those things could be true at the same time without one canceling the other. Hyun-gi heard it for what it was. He nodded once. He walked to the western exit and left. Then Nia was moving toward him across the concrete floor, and he turned to face her, and she looked at his hand pressed against his ribs and said, How bad? Manageable. That's not an answer. 2, maybe 3 cracked ribs. It's manageable. She stopped in front of him. She was close enough that he could see the cut on her forearm clearly, small but real, the edge she had caught coming through the building, and the exertion still present in her breathing, and the controlled, steady quality of her eyes that he had been reading for 2 days now and had come to understand as the most honest information he had access to. You weren't supposed to come, he said. I know. Zuri is safe, I told you. She held his gaze. And I told you I wasn't going to sit in a back room while someone used me as an excuse. She paused. Besides, something moved in her expression. Not quite a smile. More the particular quality that arrived when something had been resolved that she had been carrying. Zuri said to come. She said you'd need someone to make sure you came back. He looked at her. She said that. Those exact words. Very certain about it. Nia paused. She was drawing the terminal before I left. The harbor, the building, all three of us standing in front of it. She held his eyes. She drew you coming out. The terminal was quiet around them. The harbor outside, the steel and the water and the indifferent machinery of a world that continued regardless. The overhead lights in their alternating pattern of yellow and shadow. Junseo felt something happen in his chest that had nothing to do with the ribs. He took his hand away from his side. He let the pain be present without managing it for a moment, which was a different kind of acknowledgement. "Let's go get Zuri," he said. Up. 6 months moved differently than he expected. He had expected the reconstruction to feel like what it was, the reassembly of a damaged structure, demanding and clinical and exhausting in the specific way of work that required constant attention to the gap between what existed and what was needed. The financial investigation ran its course through the secondary holdings. The exposure cost what it cost. Lawyers managed what could be managed, and the rest was absorbed. Daewon handled the operational reorganization with the quiet competence of 14 years, and what emerged from the other side of it was smaller than what had preceded it, and cleaner, and carried less weight. He had expected that part. What he hadn't expected was the rest of it. The Saturday mornings in a Mapo neighborhood apartment, not the safe house, a different one, larger, on a street where the light came in at a particular angle in the late morning, where Zuri spread her sketchbooks across the kitchen table and gave him unsolicited and extremely detailed critiques of the drawings he attempted and failed to produce, because she had decided early on that he needed to learn and that she was the appropriate teacher. He was not a natural artist. This was established definitively by week 2 and revisited regularly. Zuri maintained a policy of honest assessment that she delivered with the cheerful directness of a child who had not yet learned that honesty could be softened without being compromised. His proportions were wrong. His perspective was inconsistent. He held the pencil incorrectly, and she corrected his grip 3 times per session without apparent frustration at the repetition. He kept coming back. Nia watched these sessions from the doorway sometimes, leaning against the frame with her coffee and an expression that she didn't always control in time. He would look up from whatever technically deficient drawing Zuri was currently dismantling and find Nia watching, and she would raise an eyebrow, and he would look back at the drawing and they would not say anything about it, because some things were more accurately held than spoken. The debt was cleared in month 2. He had handled it through a mechanism that was clean and untraceable, and that Nia had accepted after 2 days of refusing it, and a conversation in the kitchen of the Mapo apartment that had lasted past midnight and had covered, in the specific exhausted honesty of late-night conversations, things that were harder to say in daylight, what she was willing to accept and why, what it meant to her to accept it, what it meant to him to give it, the distinction between help and transaction, and what made the difference. She had accepted it. She had also found a better job, a senior translation position at an international consultancy that had been interested in her for 8 months, and that she had not pursued because the hours required stability she didn't have. In month 3, she started. In month 4, she stopped calculating whether the margin existed. This was a significant change, visible to him in the specific way that the absence of habitual tension was visible. The slight release in the jaw, the different quality of breath in the evenings. He noticed these things. He was aware of noticing them and did not examine the awareness too carefully. Yoongi had delivered everything in the morning he had been told to. The documents, the records, the complete map of 15 years of financial architecture, annotated by the man who had built it, including the parts that had been leaked and the parts that hadn't. He had done it with the professional completeness of a man who understood that this was the only form of accountability available to him. After that, he had disappeared from Junseo's world as thoroughly as a person could disappear from a world they had inhabited for 15 years. Junseo had received no word of him and had not looked. Seijin had been found in a Seongdong storage unit, alive, 3 days after the terminal. He had been processed through the appropriate channels and had not been heard from since. The investigation into Taeguk's Yoido operation had been initiated through a contact at a regulatory authority who owed Junseo a debt of the undocumented kind. The investigation was slow and ongoing and would eventually arrive somewhere useful. Taeguk had been quiet for 6 months. Junseo expected him to stay quiet. A man who had spent 14 months building toward a single move and had found the move insufficient did not typically attempt the same target again. He would find a different problem to be patient about. The empire reconstituted was smaller. Jun Seo had made decisions during the reconstruction that he had not fully anticipated making. Several of the secondary holdings that had been exposed in the investigation he had not rebuilt. The operations that lived in the most legally adjacent territory, the ones that Hyun-gi's documentation had illuminated most clearly, he had not resumed. Partly this was strategic, partly it was something else that he examined carefully in the honest hours and found to be genuine rather than performed. Daewon had noticed. He had not commented. He had adjusted, with the professional adaptability of 14 years, to a structure that was different from the one he had started in and had not asked Junseo to explain the difference. This was the specific value of a person who had known you for 14 years. They could see the change in the architecture without requiring you to narrate it. What? The Han River was doing the thing it did in early spring, holding the light differently, the surface less winter gray and more something that was approaching tentatively the quality of warmth. The sky was the particular pale blue of a season that has not yet committed to itself, but is clearly moving in one direction. Zuri had her sketchbook. She always had her sketchbook. This had not changed, and Junseo no longer expected it to change. The sketchbook was as fundamental to her presence as her breathing. She sat on the bench beside him with her legs swinging because the bench was sized for adults, and her feet did not reach the ground, and her pencil moved with the same focused certainty it always moved with, the sound of it on the paper, a regular grounding percussion. Nia was on his other side. The three of them occupied a bench overlooking the river on a Sunday afternoon in early spring, without bodyguards and without an agenda, and without anything that required attention beyond the specific ordinary fact of being in a place and being present in it. He had cleared 2 meetings to be here. He had not mentioned clearing the meetings. Zuri showed him her current drawing without breaking the forward momentum of it, tilting the sketchbook toward him while continuing to add detail in another quadrant, the multitasking fluency of a child who had been drawing since before she had language for what she was doing. It showed the river, the bench, 3 figures. The proportions were better than his, significantly better. He had told her this once, in a tone that he had miscalculated as neutral, and she had patted his arm with the specific condescension of an expert toward a promising beginner, and said, "You're getting there." He was apparently getting there. "The man on the bench," he said, looking at the drawing. "The tall one." "That's you." "The proportions are accurate." She looked at the drawing critically. "I made your shoulders a little too wide." "I have wide shoulders." "Not that wide." She tilted the sketchbook back and added a corrective line with the certainty of an artist addressing a known error. "There." He looked at the corrected figure. The shoulders were marginally less dramatic. The figure still looked like him, the height, the jaw, the way he sat, which Zuri had captured with a 7-year-old's unfiltered observation. Slightly forward, elbows on knees, attention moving. Nia had been reading something on her phone. She tilted her head to look at the drawing from the side. "The hair's right." "The hair is always right," Zuri said, with the tone of a person noting that one component of a complex project had never presented difficulties. Junseo looked at the river. Somewhere under the pale spring sky, Seoul was doing what it always did, moving, churning, the complicated machinery of a city that had been carrying his weight for 20 years without acknowledgement. The shipping empires and the financial structures and the rival syndicates and the politicians who avoided certain gazes and the quiet operations that moved through the city's body the way things move through a body without the body knowing. He had built that. He had sustained it. He had survived inside it in the way that required a specific kind of person, the kind who had learned early that the only reliable thing was the thing you controlled, and had spent 20 years exercising control with a precision that had become its own form of isolation. He looked at the drawing in Zuri's sketchbook. The figure on the bench with the slightly corrected shoulders, sitting beside the woman and the child on the bench overlooking the river. He had been drawn into a family 4 years before he knew the family existed, had been placed, in crayon and pencil, in the space beside these 2 people by a child who had no rational mechanism for the knowledge. He had been the man in the drawing, the protector, the presence, the figure who stood at the right-hand side of a life he hadn't built and couldn't have imagined building, long before he'd arrived. He understood now. with the specific clarity of something that had been resolving slowly for 6 months and had arrived at completion somewhere between the Saturday drawing lessons and the late-night kitchen conversation and the moment in the terminal when Nia had appeared in the doorway, and he had felt his chest do something he was no longer going to spend energy misidentifying, that the question was not what the drawings meant. The question was whether he was going to be the person in them, not the Ghost King, not the feared name, not the man who had built an empire on the premise that needing nothing from anyone was the only protection that lasted. The person Zuri had drawn, the one sitting on the bench, the one who had come back. "Junseo," Zuri said. He looked at her. She was holding out the pencil. "Draw something," she said. He looked at the pencil. He looked at the sketchbook, open to the page with the river and the bench and the 3 figures. There was space at the bottom of the page, a margin below the bench, below the river, between the drawing and the edge of the paper. He took the pencil. He thought for a moment. Then he drew a sun. Small, in the corner, the basic circle with lines version that was technically within his current capability. He drew it in the lower right, where the drawing's composition left a gap that the sky didn't reach. Zuri looked at it. She tilted her head. She considered it with the professional seriousness she applied to all assessments. Then she nodded once, the specific nod of an artist who has reviewed a contribution and found it acceptable. "The lines are even," she said. "That's better than last week." "I practiced." She looked at him. The direct, unfiltered, ancient-eyed look that had been the first thing about her that had gotten through his defenses and had not stopped getting through them since. "I know," she said. "I saw you." He looked at her. "When?" he said. "Tuesday. You were at the table after I went to bed. You thought I was asleep." She returned to her drawing without ceremony. "You drew 12 suns. Most of them were bad." Nia made a sound beside him. Not quite a laugh. Something that had laughter's quality without committing to it. The sound of a woman experiencing something she found genuinely funny and was choosing not to fully release in consideration of the person beside her, which he had come to understand over 6 months was one of the ways she was kind. He looked at the small sun he had drawn in the corner of Zuri's page. The lines were even. It had taken 12 bad ones to get to an even one. He handed Zuri's pencil back. She took it without looking up, already adding the next element to the drawing with the focused piece of a child who had gotten what she wanted and was satisfied and was now simply in the work of the thing she loved. He looked at the river. Nia's shoulder was warm against his. She had not moved away. He had not moved away. The specific ordinary warmth of that contact had been accumulating for 6 months in the particular way that things accumulated when neither person was ready to examine them directly. Small, regular, real. "She's going to make you draw something worse next week," Nia said. Quiet. Not quite the private register, but close to it. The register that was only for the 2 of them. "I know. She has a whole progression plan. She told me." A pause. "She said you're going to do hands next. She called it your biggest technical weakness." He considered this. She's not wrong. She's 7 and she draws better than most adults, and she has zero mercy about it. The warmth in Nia's voice when she talked about her daughter was the most uncomplicated sound he had heard from her, fully present, undivided by the controlled layers she maintained with the rest of the world. "She gets it from her mother." He looked at her. She was looking at the river, the profile of her. The hair, the jaw, the particular quality of her gaze when it was directed at something that gave her space to be unguarded. She felt him looking and didn't turn, but the corner of her mouth moved. "I have zero mercy," she confirmed. "I've noticed." "Useful thing to know." "Yes." The river moved. The spring sky held its pale, tentative warmth. Zuri's pencil worked its steady percussion against the paper. Junseo sat on the bench overlooking the Han River with the specific, unfamiliar, and entirely genuine weight of a life that was asking something different of him than anything he had built for 20 years, and felt the question of whether he was equal to it. Sit in him without demanding an immediate answer, which was its own kind of answer. He thought about the drawing in his inside coat pocket. He had moved it from coat to coat for 6 months, transferring it during each change of clothes with the automatic care of someone transporting something that mattered and was no longer questioning why it mattered. The harbor drawing, The terminal, the dark building, the three figures standing in front of it. Zuri had drawn them coming out. She had been right. He thought about the drawing that had started all of it. The crayon sun, the three figures in the golden sky, the tall Korean man with the black coat standing beside two people who were not his family and had been, somehow, his family for 4 years before he knew their names. He thought about what it cost to be the person a child believed you could be. He had expected the cost to be subtraction, the dismantling of walls, the exposure of the hollow that Taeguk had correctly identified, and that Junso had spent 20 years refusing to acknowledge. He had expected it to feel like loss. It did not feel like loss. It felt like the difference between a building that was structurally perfect and completely empty and a building that had been lived in, marked, imperfect, warmer than it had any right to be, full of the complicated evidence of people who had brought their whole selves into it and had not been turned away. Zuri held up her sketchbook. The drawing was finished. The river, the bench, the three figures. His small son in the corner, even-lined and genuinely his, the evidence of 12 bad attempts distilled into one that was adequate and real. "It's good," she said. Not to him specifically, to the drawing. The honest assessment of a 7-year-old artist who had finished a piece and found it worth keeping. She closed the sketchbook. She leaned against him. The weight of her was small and specific and completely unself-conscious. The full-body lean of a child who has decided that a person is safe and that leaning on them is the most natural thing available. She put her head against his arm and watched the river and hummed something tuneless and content. And he looked at the top of her head and the river and the pale spring sky and felt the empire he had spent 20 years building recede to its correct proportion, significant, damaged, survivable, and felt the bench and the river and the small warm weight against his arm take up the space that proportion opened. He did not move. The river moved. The city breathed around them. Seoul, indifferent and enormous, and full of the lives of people navigating it in every possible direction, continued its rotation. And on a bench in the early spring light, the ghost king of Seoul sat with his family, without weapons and without the throne, and was for the first time in the full length of his life entirely, accurately located. Not feared, found,